I stood outside my son's penthouse door, holding hot beef stew after my fourth job of the day. For 3 years, I had worked 5 jobs, sending him every spare dollar, because he claimed debt was destroying him. Then I heard laughter inside. "The old man is proud of working 5 jobs." My son scoffed. "That's just proof of a failed life. Let him keep sending money. At least he's still useful." The whole room erupted. Right then, something shifted in me. I knew I had to find out what was really going on. What you're about to hear is the story of a father who placed his faith where it didn't belong. Welcome back to Alphadad Stories. I'm glad you're here with me today. If stories like this one stay with you, consider following along so you never miss the next one. Before we go further, I want to ask, have you ever had someone in your own family work against you in secret? Drop a word in the comments. I read everyone. One more thing, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. It's the truth at the center of it that matters. My name is Gerald Mallory, and at 67 years old, I have come to understand that a man's worst error is mistaking love for utility. Let me go back to the beginning. This morning unfolded the way every morning has for 3 years. 4:15 a.m., pitch dark, my body stirring before the alarm, because muscle memory cuts deeper than exhaustion ever could. I swung my legs out of bed in my modest 2-bedroom house in Hyde Park, where the homes settle quietly into their lots and neighbors mind their own business. My knees cracked. My back screamed. I ignored both. Before I left the bedroom, I stopped at the nightstand. Vivian's photograph sits there in a plain wooden frame, her at 43 laughing at something I'd said, cheeks bright with joy. She has been gone 11 years now. Cancer moved fast. I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside, folded into neat quarters, is the letter she wrote me 3 days before she passed. The envelope has gone soft from years of handling, but I have never broken the seal. Not from forgetfulness, from fear. I am terrified she wrote something I am not yet ready to carry. I closed the drawer. 5 jobs, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is my life. Has been for 3 years running, ever since my son Darnell, 38 years old, Princeton-educated, sharp as a razor, came to me with wet eyes and told me his business was going under in debt. $180,000 had loan. A supplier lawsuit that went sideways, he said. Creditors closing in like wolves. He needed help, Dad. Just for a while. I cashed out my retirement the following week. It wasn't enough, so I started working. Job 1, overnight security guard at a downtown office tower, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. I sit behind a desk, watch monitors, walk the floors twice a shift. Job 2, delivery driver, 6 a.m. to noon. I haul packages up staircases, navigate Cincinnati's streets, smile at strangers who look straight through me. Job 3, hardware store clerk, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. I stock shelves, field questions about drill bits, act like my hands aren't trembling. Job 4, grocery stocking, 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. More lifting, more shelves, more humming, fluorescent lights overhead. Job 5, weekend handyman work. Fixing toilets, painting fences, swapping out gutters, whatever someone will pay for. Every check I earn goes straight to Darnell. Every cent. He tells me the creditors won't let up. I believe him because he is my son, and believing your son is a father's most basic instinct. 3 years. When did I last sleep past sunrise? When did I last wake without my spine grinding like rusted gears? When did I last eat a meal seated at an actual table instead of hunched over a sink? I can't say. But I keep going. Because Darnell is all I have. Vivian is gone. Our daughter never made it home from the hospital, lost in childbirth at 19. Darnell is the only remaining thread of the family we wove together. So I work. I don't complain. I don't wait for thanks. Tonight, after my grocery shift wrapped up, I went home and made stew. Vivian's recipe: chicken, sweet corn, potatoes, white wine, and fresh rosemary. I packed it still warm into a container and drove to the Carew Tower Residences. The Carew Tower Residences is a luxury high-rise in downtown Cincinnati, all glass and steel, and doormen in uniforms worth more than my monthly food bill. Darnell lives on the 14th floor in a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. I know because I helped him move in 2 years ago, hauling boxes up the service elevator while he called out directions. I rode the elevator up tonight still in my delivery uniform, stained and wrinkled from the shift. The hallway on the 14th floor is marble, the kind that clicks under your heels with every step. I walked to his door, the container getting heavier in my grip. I raised my fist to knock. Then I heard laughter from inside. Loud, unguarded, the kind that comes with expensive whiskey and a room full of people who have never once lost sleep over a bill. I stopped. Darnell's voice came right through the door, sharp and clear. Honestly, the guy's proud of working 5 jobs. 5. To me, that is just the hallmark of a failed life. More laughter, a woman's voice. Oh my God, Darnell. I am serious. He kept going. Every week, like clockwork, he sends me these checks with little notes. Hope this helps, son. It is pathetic. If he had any real skills, any actual value, he would not need to work like a dog just to scrape together pennies. Someone else chimed in. Doesn't he know you are loaded? Darnell laughed. He knows what I tell him, and what I tell him is that I am drowning in debt, and he is my only lifeline. Keeps him useful, keeps him out of my hair. The laughter that followed bounced off the marble walls of that hallway. I stood there, container in both hands, and felt something give way inside my chest. Not my heart, that would be too simple. Something quieter. Something that had been holding me upright for 3 years. I set the container down on the floor in front of his door. The plastic barely made a sound against the marble. Then I turned and walked back to the elevator. I kept my footsteps quiet. I made sure of that. Descending 14 floors, I watched myself in the polished steel doors. 67 years old. Silver hair, a face mapped with lines, a uniform that smelled of sweat and diesel. I looked precisely like a man who had ground himself down to nothing for a son who mocked him behind a closed door. I made one decision as the elevator reached the ground floor. I would not cry tonight. I would not fall apart. I would not raise my voice at anyone. I would hold on to every word, every laugh, every note of contempt I'd heard from the son I'd bled for. And I would think very carefully about what I did next. I sat in my delivery truck in a dark supermarket parking lot on the south side for 5 hours straight, staring at nothing because going home meant pretending this evening hadn't happened. It was 11:01 p.m. The lot was deserted, except for a single streetlight flickering every 30 seconds. I counted the flickers. 20, 40, 60, then lost the thread. The cab smelled of diesel and stale coffee. My hands sat on the steering wheel even though the engine was off. Outside, a security guard made his rounds past the entrance, flashlight swinging. He didn't notice me. Nobody does. I turned the words over and over in my mind. The deadbeat old bastard actually thinks he is helping, keeps him useful, keeps him out of my hair. 3 years, 5 jobs, 14 hours a day, $100 no. $80,000 in debt he swore was swallowing him whole. And I believed every syllable because he wept when he asked. Because he is my son. Because after Vivian died, And our daughter never came home from the hospital. Darnell was all that remained of the life we'd built together. I pulled out my phone at 3:30 a.m. Darnell's name glowed on the screen. My thumb hung over the call button for a full 10 minutes. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. Not yet. Something settled in my chest. Not grief, I'd left that in the elevator. This was colder, sharper. A decision setting hard like water turning to ice. I would not confront him. Not tomorrow. Not the week after. Not until I knew exactly what he had done and how far it reached. If Darnell believed I was a compliant fool, then I'd be the most convincing fool he'd ever played. I'd smile. I'd cook him dinner. I'd keep sending checks with little notes. Hope this helps, son. And the whole time I was doing that, I'd be going through every document I'd signed, every bank statement I'd waved past, every story he'd fed me about creditors and lawsuits and a business drowning in red ink. My son made one serious miscalculation tonight. He decided I was too worn down to push back. At 4:15 a.m., my body came awake out of sheer habit, even though I hadn't closed my eyes. I started the truck and drove home to shower and change. At 6:00 a.m., I clocked in for my delivery route as though nothing had shifted. At 6:45, I pulled into a diner and picked up 2 breakfast sandwiches. At 7:00 a.m., I knocked on Darnell's door. He answered in a cashmere robe, yawning hair still pressed flat from the pillow. "Dad, you are early." I held up the bag. "I made your favorite. Well, bought it. Ham and egg on a toasted brioche roll, extra cheese." Something moved across his face, surprise, maybe guilt, maybe just irritation, but he took the bag. "Thanks. You did not have to do that." "I know," I said, keeping the smile in place. "But I wanted to. You work so hard, Darnell. I just want to make sure you are eating right." He studied me for a long moment. I held the smile steady. At last he nodded. "You are a good dad." I almost laughed. I left before he could see my hands shaking. Tuesday afternoon, when my hardware store shift ended at 6:00 p.m., I didn't head to my grocery stocking job. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. My manager sounded genuinely startled. I told him it was a stomach bug. He told me to get some rest. Instead, I drive to the Cincinnati Public Library main branch. The second-floor reading room is quiet, a handful of college students with headphones, and an elderly woman working through the newspapers. I borrow a laptop from the front desk on my library card. I haven't touched a computer for anything beyond work emails in years. My fingers feel stiff and uncertain on the keys, but enough comes back to me. I start with my email account. I pull up every message Darnell sent over the past 3 years. There are dozens. Most run just a few lines. "Thanks for the check, Dad. Creditors are pushing hard this month. You are saving my life." I find the earliest one dated September 2020. The subject line, "Emergency, please call." Attached to the body is a PDF, a legal document headed "Demand for Payment," listing a debt of $180,000 owed by a company called Vivian's Craft Supply, LLC. I stare at that name for a full minute. Vivian's Craft Supply, LLC. I incorporated that company for my wife back in 2007. She loved making quilts, hand-stitched blankets, small decorative pillows she sold at weekend craft fairs. It brought her real happiness. She never turned much of a profit, maybe a few $1,000s in a good year, but it was hers. Something separate from being a mother and a wife. Something that belonged only to Vivian. When she fell ill in 2008, the craft business went quiet. After she passed in 2012, I never touched the account. It just sat there, a corporate shell with her name on it, dormant. Darnell knew about it. Of course he did. He helped me set it up when he was 24, fresh out of business school, eager to put his knowledge of LLCs and tax structures to use. I opened another tab and searched for Vivian's Craft Supply LLC in the Ohio Business Registry. Still active. The registered agent, Darnell Mallory. Changed from my name to his in 2019. I clicked through more documents Darnell had sent me over the years. Bank statements, payment receipts, every single one listed Vivian's Craft Supply LLC as the debtor. The debt had nothing to do with some outside venture gone sideways. My son had been systematically draining his dead mother's company, then coming to me and claiming he needed help covering creditors. He used her name, her legacy, the one small thing she built that was entirely her own. I sat frozen in that library chair. Around me, students typed. The old woman turned a page. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop at the curb. My hands were shaking again, but not from grief this time, not even from shock, from rage. I opened a new tab. I typed one key at a time deliberately, like I was filing a report. Elder Financial Abuse Attorney, Cincinnati, Ohio. The results filled the screen. Dozens of law firms, free consultations, testimonials from families who found out too late that someone they loved had been robbing them blind. I stared at it all. Vivian's Craft Supply LLC. Her name attached to documents that laid out systematic theft in black and white. My son didn't just steal from me. He stole from his dead mother's legacy. I needed a lawyer, yes. But first, I had to know exactly how far this reached. At 2:00 a.m. on a Wednesday night, sitting across from Aldous Beckham at the security desk, with 2 cups of stale coffee between us, I broke my silence for the first time and told another person what my son had said. The words came out flat. No tears, no crack in my voice, just the facts laid out the way you'd write an incident report. Monday night. The Carew Tower Residences. Standing outside the door, holding a container of home-cooked stew, my son's voice carrying through the door, calling me a deadbeat old bastard. The laughter. Walking away. Then Tuesday afternoon at the library. Vivian's Craft Supply LLC. The company I'd built for my late wife, now hemorrhaging money into documents bearing my son's signature. Aldous listened without a word. The fluorescent lights hummed yellow above us. The CCTV monitors glowed in the corner, cycling through empty hallways and parking garages. We had shared this desk for 2 years, 5 nights a week, mostly in easy silence. I knew he took his coffee black. I knew he reads military history during the slow hours. I knew he had a daughter in Colorado he didn't speak about. But I'd never known what he did before any of this. When I finished, Aldous set his coffee down with care. The ceramic cup clicked against the metal desk. Jerry. He said, the only person who calls me that short for Raymond, my middle name. Before I ended up in this uniform, I spent 22 years as a corporate insurance fraud investigator. I looked at him. Aldous Beckham, 64 years old, silver-haired with eyes sharp as cut glass behind wire-rimmed frames, leaned back in his chair. What you just described is not a family matter. That is a criminal offense. Elder financial exploitation. Corporate identity theft. Fraud. If your son used your late wife's business entity to manufacture debt and pull money from you under false pretenses, he committed multiple felonies. The words landed like cold water. I spent 2 decades tracking people who do exactly what your son is doing, Aldous went on. They locate a vulnerable target, almost always family, almost always someone who trusts them completely, and they drain them dry while keeping it looking legitimate on paper. I am not vulnerable, I said quietly. No. Aldous agreed. You are not, but your son believes you are. That is his first mistake. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Do you want my help? I looked at this man I had spent 2 years beside, drinking stale coffee at 2:00 a.m., watching silent monitors. All those nights, each of us carrying our own weight without saying so. Help me how? Aldous smiled for the first time that night. Not a warm smile. The smile of someone who has just picked up a trail the right way. Friday afternoon. I sat in the passenger seat of Aldis's sedan parked 3 blocks from the building where I work my office cleaning shift. Rain hammered the roof. The windows fogged with our breath. Aldis had papers spread across the dashboard, bank statements I'd pulled from my files, receipts. Copies of documents Darnell had sent me over the past 3 years. He worked through them steadily, a reading lamp clipped to the sun visor, throwing hard light across the pages. Here, he said, tapping a bank statement. September 2022. You sent Darnell $2,800. It cleared your account on the 15th. I nodded. I remembered. He said the creditors were threatening legal action. Aldis produced another sheet. Same month. A joint account your son opened in both your names back in 2020. You gave him signature authority. Yes. He said it would make transferring funds easier. I said. Right. On September 17th, 2 days after your check cleared a withdrawal. $9,600. Payee luxury timepieces of Cincinnati. He slid a printout across to me. A receipt. Patek Philippe Aquanaut stainless steel. Date of purchase September 17th, 2022. Total $9,600. October. Aldis continued, drawing out another document. You sent him $3,000 on October. Mercedes-Benz of Cincinnati. Lease agreement. BMW 7 Series. $1,350 per month. Another paper. November. You sent $2,500. Capitol Grill Cincinnati reservation for 6 people. $150. He kept going. Month after month for the past 3 years, my checks arrive, and days later, money flows out of the joint account into luxury purchases. Watches, cars, restaurants I couldn't afford to walk past. The rain beat down on the sedan roof. The papers spread across Aldis's dashboard glowed under the streetlight. Each receipt was a small knife. Your son is not paying off debt, Aldis said quietly. He is funding a lifestyle, and I think I know why. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph from a society page. Cincinnati Business Times, dated 3 months ago. A charity gala. In the photo, my son stood in a tuxedo beside a young woman in an evening gown. The caption, Darnell Mallory of Mallory Consulting with Solange Vanthorpe, daughter of industrialist Reginald Vanthorpe. Reginald Vanthorpe. I knew that name. Everyone in Cincinnati does. Billionaire real estate energy sector of the wealthiest men in Ohio. Your son is desperately performing for his wealthy in-laws, Aldis said. The Patek Philippe, the BMW, the expensive dinners, he is constructing a false image of grand success to match his wife's standing, and you are paying for every piece of it. I stared at the photograph. My son looked polished, confident, successful, everything I was not. I reached out to an old contact, Aldis said. Rudy Ferrano, private investigator. He worked alongside me on insurance fraud cases for 15 years. He is discreet, thorough, and he owes me a favor. If there is more your son is hiding, and I guarantee you there is, Rudy will find it. I looked out the rain-streaked window at the gray Cincinnati street. 3 years. 5 jobs. Every dollar I scraped together going toward Patek Philippe. Watches and luxury car leases so my son could impress a woman whose father probably earns more in a single hour than I make in a year. Where do we start? I ask. Aldous tucks the financial analysis into a neat fold and lays it on the dashboard. His face gives the way nothing calm cold, the look of a man who has done this before. We start with a shadow, he says. That Saturday morning, my neighbor Odette Carmody is waiting on her porch with a photograph of a license plate. Someone knocked on my door last week. She tells me, wanting to know whether I believed you could still make decisions for yourself. Rudy Ferrano had begun tailing my son around Cincinnati that Friday. But Odette's words landed differently. Surveillance wasn't only Aldis's move. Someone was already running it against me. Odette Carmody, 71 years old, 30 years, my neighbor, stood wrapped in a cardigan on a mild September morning. The woman doesn't miss a thing. 3 decades on our Hyde Park block, and she has reported every unfamiliar car idling too long, every streetlight gone dark, every dog that doesn't belong. Which man? I ask. Tuesday, she says. 10 in the morning, give or take. He knocked, showed identification. He pulled back before I could read it. Told me he was a social worker doing wellness rounds on elderly folks in the area. Something cold moves through my gut. Then came the questions, Odette says. Does Gerald Mallory lose track of things? Is he safe driving by himself? Does he feed himself properly? Does he get confused? Can he handle his own money? Odette's porch carries the scent of autumn chrysanthemums. Her hands aren't quite steady as she extends the photograph, a license plate shot clean and clear through her front window. She had been standing guard for me before I even knew there was a fight. As I told him, she says, jaw set, that Gerald Mallory has a sharper mind than I do, and if he didn't leave my porch, I was dialing the police. I take the photograph. Ohio plate. Doesn't mean anything to me, but it will to Aldous. Did he go door to door? Not that I could see. Just me. He cleared off the moment I mentioned 911. I wrap my arms around her. She smells of lavender soap and old books. Thank you, Odette. Hold on to that photo. And the moment anyone else turns up with questions about me, I need to know. Obviously, she says, then drops her voice. Gerald, what is happening? Trouble with family, I tell her. That much is true. My mind is already running. Money was never the whole game. My son is after something bigger, my right to run my own life. Here is what you need to know. In Ohio, a court-issued guardianship order can take everything. Your finances, your medical choices, your roof over your head erased by a single judge's pen. Whoever is named guardian runs the show. You don't graduate from that. You don't age out. What it requires to get there is neighbor testimony, a social worker's write-up, a physician raising doubts about your cognition. Darnell had moved past theft. He was constructing a cage around me. I fired off a text to Aldous with a photo of the plate. His reply landed inside 2 minutes. Bring it Monday. Rudy has his first report ready. Monday evening, Aldis's one-bedroom apartment in Norwood. Books packed wall-to-wall, kitchen table buried in manila folders. Rudy Ferrano was already seated when I walked in. Mid-50s, solid but unremarkable build, precisely the sort of man a crowd swallows whole, which is, I gather, the whole point. He and Aldous had worked corporate fraud together for 15 years. These days, Rudy runs his own shop, what he describes as personal misconduct research. He had been on Darnell's trail for 5 days. Your son isn't employed, Rudy said, pushing photographs across the table. Not genuinely. Mallory Consulting is a shell, no staff, no office space, just a business registration and a web page. The photographs placed Darnell at locations across Cincinnati. Rolling out of the Carew Tower residences at 10:00 a.m., dressed for the gym. Walking into an upscale fitness club downtown. parked at sidewalk bistros with wine and small plates, priced somewhere between $80 and $150. Tracked luxury gym membership, Rudy went on. $200 a month. Restaurants twice daily rotating, never budget. Most afternoons, he makes an appearance at Van Thorpe Group headquarters full performance mode, playing the successful executive for his wife's family. He's auditioning for them, I said. Every single day, Rudy confirmed. But that isn't what I want you looking at. He laid out a second spread of photographs. My son stepping through a downtown building entrance. Mounted beside the door, a brass plate, Graywell and Fitch Legal. 3 appointments across 2 weeks, Rudy said. Tuesday the 9th, Thursday the 18th this morning, Monday the 22nd. Each one ran between 90 minutes and 2 hours. Aldous pushed forward in his seat. Graywell and Fitch have exactly one specialty estate and guardianship litigation. Not wills, not contracts. You go to that firm when you want a court to hand you legal authority over another person's existence. The photographs spread between us. My son pressed and polished, walking through the door of a firm that exists to take people's lives out of their own hands. That license plate Odette photographed, Aldous said, nudging another sheet across. Registered to Summit Wellness Consulting. A front operation. They sell independent evaluations for guardianship filings. $1,500 buys you a team that will knock on your target's neighbors' doors, talk to their doctors, whoever you point them at, and deliver a report pre-written to your specifications. 3 visits to a guardianship firm in under 2 weeks, Aldous continued. Paid operatives constructing fabricated testimony. Jerry, this isn't reconnaissance. This is a coordinated takedown. I stared at those photographs of my son entering that building, every image carrying a date and a timestamp, a paper trail proving he is moving to have me declared incompetent. How long before he pulls the trigger and files on Sukstutraikum, I ask. Rudy and Aldous looked at one another. 6 weeks at the outside, Rudy said. Could be shorter. That volume of meetings with Graywell and Fitch means they're putting the final touches on the petition. The moment it lands in court, you get a hearing date and the clock starts. And I might not beat it, I said. You will if we don't wait for him to move, Aldous said, quiet and even. I sat there looking at these 2 men, a fraud investigator who traded his badge for a security desk, and a private detective who owed him a favor, crowded into a Norwood apartment, going to war beside me against my own son. So what's the next move? Aldous pressed a finger onto the Graywell and Fitch photograph. We learn precisely what petition they intend to file. Then we take it apart one element at a time before it ever touches a courtroom. 6 weeks to kill a guardianship petition. That night I lay awake working through the arithmetic. A legal defense costs money I simply don't have. Tuesday afternoon, I drove out to the West End industrial zone, a heavy iron key on a cord beneath my shirt, a key to a building I haven't set foot in for 4 years. Every time I consider going, Vivian's hands appear in my mind, signing the deed. The West End zone is rusted fence and fractured blacktop warehouses, the shade of old copper lined up row by row like headstones. I rolled my truck to a pair of iron gates chained shut with a padlock larger than my fist. The sign bolted above them. Lot 47B, $12,000 square feet. I stepped out. The key had rested under my shirt every day since Vivian died. Never once removed. Never breathed a word of what it opens. The padlock gave with a solid clunk. The gates dragged open on corroded hinges. Inside, weathered corrugated steel walls, a vaulted ceiling with skylights greased gray by industrial years, a concrete slab mapped with oil stains from decades of work. Vivian purchased this property in 2006 using everything she had put aside. $43,000 accumulated across 15 years of craft fairs and quilt sales set away one careful dollar at a time. She said it was for the grandchildren one day. I didn't follow what she meant. We had Darnell and our daughter was already gone. Which grandchildren? But Vivian didn't waver. She executed the deed herself, demanded her name stand alone on the title, and extracted a promise from me never sell unless the family required it. The warehouse carries the smell of rust and old rain. Late afternoon light slices through grimy panes in long gold bars. This was Vivian's cathedral. I crossed the empty floor, each step ringing back from the walls. High in the far corner, a small hand-painted wooden sign still occupies the spot she chose for it. 13 years ago, Vivian's for the little ones. Darnell never learned about this place. Not while Vivian breathed. Not after she was gone. It was hers. Set apart. The one thing I never let the wreckage touch. My phone went off. I drew it out. A text from a number I didn't know, Cincinnati area code. Mr. Mallory, this is Kent Oswald, Keystone Logistics Corporation. We wish to finalize discussions regarding acquisition of your West End lot. Our initial buyout offer remains at $4.8 million. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to schedule closing. I read it once, read it again, a third time. $4.8 million. My legs stopped holding me properly. I lowered myself to the concrete back flat against the wall, the phone still lit up in my hands. How did Vivian know? How did she see 11 years ahead and understand that I would need exactly this protection? She bought this warehouse when Darnell was 26, fresh out of graduate school, still addressing me like a human being rather than a source to be mined. She purchased it after our daughter was already gone, when the notion of grandchildren felt impossible, and she bought it anyway. For the little ones, she said. I look up at her sign. Vivian, my wife, gone 11 years, still standing guard over me from the other side. I rise slowly, legs unsteady beneath me. I turn a slow circle in the center of the warehouse floor. 12,000 square feet of commercial real estate in an industrial corridor that has been quietly gentrifying for a decade. Companies like Keystone Logistics, purchasing old warehouses to convert into tech offices, distribution hubs, artisan markets. $4.8 million. I have spent 3 years grinding through 5 jobs and 14-hour days, forwarding every dollar I earned to my son, so he could acquire Patek Philippe watches and lease BMWs and settle in at restaurants, where the wine tab exceeds my weekly grocery budget. And the whole time the key to a fortune has been hanging around my neck. I texted Aldous, need to meet tonight, important. His answer came back in seconds. My place, 8:00 p.m. I locked the warehouse gates and tucked the key back under my shirt, cold metal warming against my chest. I drove back through Cincinnati in a fog radio, silent windows, down September air moving across my face. Vivian. She acquired this property with quilting money. 15 years of craft fairs. $43,000 that grew into $4.8 million because she understood something I never did. The future runs long, and the people you love will need foundations laid long before they ever know to ask for them. My thoughts drift to the letter sitting in my nightstand drawer. The one I have never broken open. The one she wrote 3 days before she died. Maybe it was time, but not yet. First, I had to understand what this warehouse meant for the fight I was in. At 8:00 p.m., I sat in Aldous' apartment. Rudy was already there. I laid out everything, the property, Vivian buying it back in 2006, the text from Keystone Logistics. Aldous stared at me for a long moment. Then he started laughing. Not a cruel laugh, a relieved one. Do you understand what you just told me? He said. You are sitting on a $4.8 million asset. your son doesn't even know exists. One, as long as Vivian kept it out of joint property, I said. Her name was on the deed alone. When she passed, it came to me through her will. Darnell was copied on the will, but he never bothered reading it. He was too occupied with his own importance at his new position to pay attention to his mother's estate. This rewrites the board, Rudy said quietly. If Darnell files for guardianship on the grounds that you're financially incapacitated and need someone to look after your affairs, you can walk into that courtroom and produce evidence of a multi-million-dollar asset you've been managing on your own for over a decade. It guts his entire argument. Aldous nodded, measuring his words. But we have to be careful with the timing. Surface the warehouse too early and Darnell recalibrates. We hold this until the moment counts. I looked at these two men across the table. When does that moment arrive? When he believes the win is already in his pocket, Aldous said. I drove home that night with the key still warm against my sternum. I sat in the dark truck in my driveway and stared at my small house in Hyde Park. $4.8 million. Vivian's voice carrying through the years for the little ones. She had known. She had built the foundation long before I understood there would be a battle to fight. Vivian had prepared that warehouse for me 13 years before I would need it. But knowing I hold leverage doesn't quiet the exhaustion of the body. At 6:30 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in Covington, 3 years of 5 jobs finally collected what they were owed. I caught my foot unloading a heavy crate and went down hard enough on the pavement that my delivery partner thought I was dying. The fog hung thick across the narrow streets. My grip failed on the crate handle. My knee gave out. The ground came up fast and cold. I heard the crack before the pain reached me. My palms tore across the concrete. My shoulder absorbed the fall. The crate pitched sideways, the cardboard splitting open. Mr. Mallory? Deshaun Waverly, 28 years old, my delivery partner for the past 6 months, came running. His face was young and frightened. He was convinced I was having a cardiac event. I'm fine, I said, though the words came out wrong, winded and thin. You are not fine, Deshaun said. He crouched beside me. Should I call an ambulance? No, just get me up. The pavement was cold and slick. My hands were torn raw. Deshaun's face hung above mine, all genuine alarm. He thought he was watching something break. He had no idea he was about to hand my son a piece of his case. Deshaun pulled me upright. I braced against the side of the truck, steadying my breath. My shoulder pulsed. My hands stung, but nothing was broken. You should have someone look at that, Deshaun said. I'm 67 years old, I told him. I've hit the floor harder in my own kitchen. He didn't look persuaded, but he let it go. We completed the route together. He took the heavy loads. I handled the paperwork and signatures. Neither of us mentioned it again. Neither did I, not until 3 days later when Aldous put a phone in front of me at the security desk. Saturday night, 2:00 a.m., our regular shift. Aldous set his phone down without a word of warning. Jerry, he said quietly, you need to watch this. Shaky footage clearly handheld. Me flat on wet pavement. Deshaun sprinting over. Timestamp Wednesday, 6:47 a.m. Caption: This old man works 5 jobs and still falls down. Someone give him a break. Below that, 43,000 views. 6,200 likes. 890 comments. I scrolled through them. The tone was kind. Somebody help this man. This is heartbreaking. Noah? Why is he working this hard at his age? Every comment was compassion. Every view was sympathy. Deshaun posted it, Aldous said. Wednesday afternoon. It spread through Cincinnati within hours. Here is what a viral video means inside a guardianship case. 43,000 witnesses to your deterioration. It doesn't matter that they feel sorry for you, not alarmed by you. It doesn't matter that they see a tired man, not an incompetent one. What a judge will see is physical decline documented and time-stamped on the public record. Your son found it. Aldous continued. He swiped to a screenshot, a text thread between Darnell and a contact saved as Graywell and Fitch Legal. Darnell's message sent Thursday morning. Can we use this video as exhibit evidence of failing physical and cognitive health? 43,000 views equals credible documentation. The reply, absolutely. Forward the link. We'll archive it before a takedown request can be made. I stared at that screen. 43,000 strangers had felt compassion for me. My own son was using it to draw the net tighter. Deshaun had no idea, I said, barely above a whisper. None, Aldous agreed. He thought maybe someone would see it and cut you some slack. Instead, he delivered your son a piece of evidence. I handed the phone back. My hands were steady. That surprised me. What do we do? Nothing, Aldous said. The video is already archived. Attempting to pull it down now makes you appear to be concealing something. We document it, fold it into our file, and start assembling counter-evidence that demonstrates you are entirely capable. Sunday morning, I took my usual seat at St. Anthony's Church in Oakley, the way I have every week for 15 years after my overnight shift ends. Third row from the back left side. Pastor Clifton Aubrey knows me by name. Half the congregation does too. After the service, Pastor Clifton caught my eye and tilted his head toward his office. Something in his expression wasn't right. His office is close and quiet, shelves running along every wall, carrying the faint scent of old paper. He pulled the door shut behind us. Raymond, he said, one of the few people who calls me by my full middle name. There's something I need to tell you. I sat. He settled across from me, hands folded on the desk. Your son came to see me last Tuesday, Pastor Clifton said. He is 63, silver-haired, carrying the particular stillness of someone who has spent 40 years in the presence of confession. He told me he was deeply troubled about your condition, said you had been showing signs of confusion, forgetting names, failing to recognize people you've known here for years. My stomach knotted. He asked me, Pastor Clifton went on, to sign an affidavit attesting that I had personally observed your cognitive decline during Sunday services. The small office seemed to close in. What did you say? I asked. I told him no. Pastor Clifton said simply and without drama. I told him you are among the sharpest men in this congregation, that you know every prayer and can recite every sermon, and that, if he truly had concerns about your welfare, he should be raising them with you directly, rather than working around you through your own community. Something loosened in my chest. Then I told him to leave my office. I'm telling you this, Pastor Clifton says, because your son is spinning a story about you, Raymond, and there's not one word of truth holding it up. I let that land. Sit with it. Should I get involved? Pastor Clifton asks. I could reach out to him directly. Put it to him plainly that what he's doing crosses a line. Don't, I tell him. Keep things exactly as they are. Darnell can't know we've had this conversation. The moment this lands in a courtroom, I'll need you on the stand, not standing there, looking like someone with a personal score to settle. He gives a slow, deliberate nod. You'll have me there when it matters. That's the promise he leaves me with. I make the drive home that afternoon with my mind locked on two things: what I can prove and what story is being told. Darnell's been at this methodically. Viral clips, fraudulent welfare checks, a pastor in his corner. Yet somewhere in that careful construction, he's made a fundamental miscalculation. Every person who has walked alongside my life is holding the line. They are refusing to lie for him. Refusing. But a wall of honest witnesses only takes me so far. What I need is someone who can weaponize the truth. On Monday, I'm alone at a table in the 12th floor cafeteria, my lunch break ticking down legal printouts scattered in front of me when Nadette Hollis, the corporate office manager, pulls up and says, "Gerald, something's not right with you." "What is it?" I meet her eyes. Nadette Hollis has been stationed on this floor for 8 years. I've pushed a mop through these same offices for 2. We say a few words when our shifts overlap in the evenings. Her schedule runs late. Mine runs into the dark. We pass each other in corridors that have emptied out for the night. She's treated me decently, but there's no pretending we're close. Our lives run on separate tracks entirely. "Nothing," I say. "Just going through some reading." Her gaze drops to the table. I watch it move across the headers. Ohio Guardianship Code, Elder Financial Exploitation, Graywell and Fitch Legal, Gerald. She says, her voice low, already pulling out the chair and sitting down without waiting for an invitation. 3 days I've watched you hunched over those same papers. What's happening? There are moments when rescue comes wrapped in the form of someone who simply paid attention. The floor manager who clocks a janitor poring over legal filings on his lunch hour. The delivery worker who catches you before you hit the ground. The pastor who won't bend the truth no matter who's asking. I give it to her straight. No frills. My son invented a debt I never owed him and used it to drain the company account his mother left behind. Now he's filing to have the court hand him legal authority over every decision in my life. I've got roughly 4 weeks before that petition lands. Nadette doesn't cut me off once. When I run out of words, she leans in across the table. "There's someone I went to law school with," she says. "Celestine Okafor. Everything she does is asset fraud and estate protection, nothing else. If this story checks out the way you're telling it, she'll clear her schedule." Nadette's phone is already out. There in the cafeteria with the smell of reheated food hanging in the air and the hum of the vending machine in the background, she dials. "Celestine, it's Nadette Hollis. I've got someone who needs to be in front of you. Emergency." "Yes, I'm aware how full your plate is. I'm asking you to trust me here." A beat of silence. Nadette's eyes find mine. "Thursday 3:00 p.m., she says. "You able to get there?" I nod once. She relays it into the phone, "He'll be there." Then she's off the call, scratching an address onto a napkin and pushing it my direction. "Grant Street, 18th floor. Do not be late." And Gerald, walk in with everything you've got. Bank statements, letters from your son, receipts, leave nothing out. That same night, I finish my grocery shift and head straight to the library. I pull her name up on the screen. Celestine Okafor, 28 years in practice. Nothing but elder financial exploitation and estate fraud. 94% success rate in contested guardianship hearings. Partner at Okafor and Lennox Legal, a different firm entirely. Nothing to do with the one Darnell is running his case through. I sit there with her photo on the screen, business portrait. Gray suit, no-nonsense face. The kind of attorney whose hourly rate would swallow my weekly paycheck whole. I close out the browser, point the truck home. That night, for the first time in 3 weeks, the alarm goes off before I'm awake to meet it. Thursday 2:45 p.m. I'm planted on the sidewalk outside a glass tower on Grant Street, in my sharpest shirt and trousers that still carry a ghost of diesel. The lobby hits you immediately, all cold marble and mirror-finish steel. A guard at the desk sends me to the 18th floor. The elevator climbs for 43 seconds. Every one of them I count. My hands are scrubbed clean, but the years are carved into them, every ridge, every scar, every knuckle that healed slightly wrong. I'm about to walk into the office of someone whose world and mine have never intersected. Celestine Okafor's firm claims the entire west half of the 18th floor. Glass runs floor to ceiling, and below it the Ohio River. The receptionist has my name. She takes me back to a corner office whose windows pull in a view that reaches across to Covington. Celestine Okafor, 52, is on her feet the moment I step through. Gray suit. Her handshake means business. She points me toward the chair facing her desk. "Mr. Mallory," she says. "Nadette gave me the broad strokes. I want all of it from the very start. Wherever you need to begin, take the time." 45 minutes I talked without stopping. Vivian's death, Darnell's fabricated debt, 3 years holding down 5 jobs at once. What I uncovered at the library. Vivian's Craft Supply LLC, the phony welfare workers, the viral footage, Pastor Clifton's warning, a warehouse sitting on millions and Darnell with no idea it exists. Celestine doesn't lift her eyes from me once to interrupt. Everything goes onto a yellow legal pad in steady, continuous strokes. When I come to the end, she rests the pen across the desk and lets the quiet hold for 10 seconds. "Mr. Mallory," she says at last, "what you've laid out for me amounts to no fewer than 4 separate state and federal felonies. Corporate identity theft, elder financial exploitation, wire fraud, fraudulent guardianship petition built on fabricated evidence. Prison time attaches to each one." She eases back into her chair. "We can take the whole thing apart," she says. "But here's what I'm going to ask of you, and it won't be easy. Your routine stays unchanged. All 5 jobs keep showing up. Keep delivering his dinner. Keep mailing those checks with the notes tucked inside. He cannot sense that anything has shifted. Not until I give you the signal." "How much time are we talking?" I ask. "Roughly 4 weeks," she says. "Could stretch to 5. I want the case sealed before we touch it off. When we strike, it has to be total. Move too early and he recalibrates and we lose the edge. I want him comfortable. I want him making mistakes." She draws a folder from her desk, lays a contract in front of me. "My retainer runs $20,000, she says. "That said, given what your warehouse property is worth and how solid your position is, I'll structure this on contingency with the fee deferred. Nothing leaves your pocket today. We prevail and we will prevail, and my payment comes out of what we recover from your son." I look down at the contract. "So when do we get moving?" I ask. "Already started," Celestine says. "I step out of that building at 4:00 p.m. My warehouse shift opens at 5:00. I climb into the truck, turn the ignition, and something breaks loose in my chest. For the first time in a month, I let myself smile. Not relief, certainty. I can see the destination from here. With serious legal firepower now behind me, the fight moves into a new chapter. Tuesday afternoon, Aldous fans a set of surveillance photographs across his dashboard and says, "Jerry, your son just walked himself into federal forgery charges. Dumb enough to do it inside a parking garage our people were already watching." His sedan is parked 3 blocks from the building on my cleaning route. Rain beats the roof in sheets. The images are crisp telephoto glass from more than one position, multiple angles covered. Monday evening. Aldous says, index finger on the first shot. "Vanthorpe Group headquarters, the parking structure. Your son intercepts Solange when she comes off her executive shift. My son is in the frame, standing at the hood of a black Mercedes with his briefcase propped open. Solange faces him in a tailored suit, fatigue written across her face. He extends a sheaf of documents toward her. Aldous moves to the next photo. Substantial stack, legal-size pages. Her whole career is built on processing corporate paperwork. Her hand moves before her brain does. She fans through the top sheets and puts her signature down without working through the details. Right there in the surveillance image, Solange's Cartier pen is moving across the page, the same pen she probably lifts for contracts worth millions. She has absolutely no idea her name is going on to something criminal. Occupational reflex, Aldous says. 50 signatures a day, and you lose the habit of reading each line. Darnell understood that. He built his whole play around it. The following photo catches Darnell tucking the paperwork back into the briefcase with the ease of a man who's just wrapped up a casual errand. Now pay attention, Aldous says. He produces a second envelope of photographs, tight close-ups run through enhancement. Rudy managed clean captures of the document pages during the signing. 2 full days of sharpening the resolution, and the text came through legible. I push forward in the seat. Preliminary guardianship filing, Aldous says. A petition naming you legally incapacitated with your son designated as guardian of record. Boilerplate forms. Solange's signature is on 6 pages. Then he goes quiet a moment. Here's what doesn't fit. We have footage of her signing 3 first page, 1 in the middle, last one in the pile. The pages between those, she never laid a hand on them. But her name is on all 6. He deals a forensic enlargement across the dashboard like a playing card. Side by side, 2 signatures. Both read Solange Vanthorpe Mallory. But they are not the same hand. The first is fluid, automatic, the mark of a woman who signs without thinking. The second is labored, the strokes tentative, the pen uncertain where it's going. Your son put his wife's signature on a court document himself. Aldous says it quietly. Do you understand what this means, Jerry? This has left the territory of a civil dispute. What we're looking at now is criminal forgery. A federal felony. You have to grasp the difference. Putting a false signature on a court document is nothing like scrawling on a school permission form. This is 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 federal false statements, up to 5 years on each count. And Darnell did it 3 times on the same filing. He was that desperate. I say it staring at the clumsy fakes. He couldn't even pull the forgery off convincingly. Desperation strips people of their precision. Aldous agrees, and imprecise people leave a trail. He collects the photographs into a folder and passes it to me. Celestine has to see these right away. This reshapes our entire legal position. We are no longer simply mounting a defense against a guardianship petition. We are building a record of active federal crimes. I take the folder. Rain keeps hammering the roof. Through the fogged windows, Cincinnati looks gray and cold. Does Solange know, I ask, that he put her name on documents she never signed? Almost certainly not. She walked away believing she'd executed routine family support paperwork. When the truth reaches her, Jerry, she's going to be the most powerful witness the prosecution has. Friday evening. My shift at the warehouse in Pendleton is winding down. I'm finishing the last of the inventory logs, when Broderick Gantry, the warehouse manager, summons me into his small glass office. Broderick, 45, built like a man who played linebacker in another life, drops his toothpick into the trash and leans back once I've settled into the chair. He says we need to have a conversation. Last week, Broderick begins a smooth-talking young fellow turned up at the loading docks, dressed sharp suit tie, expensive watch. Started asking questions about you. My stomach goes tight. He wanted to know, Broderick goes on, whether you doze off mid-shift, whether you miss entries in the log, whether you get turned around on procedures. Claimed his father was slipping a little, and he was just genuinely concerned about how you were holding up out here. Broderick lets that sit a moment. I recognized him, he says. You showed me a family photo 3 years back. That's your son, isn't it? The one who studied at Princeton. Yes, I say. Low and quiet. Broderick nods. That's what I thought. So I told him Mr. Mallory is the most dependable man on this floor. 3 years, perfect attendance. Not one safety incident. Best log accuracy in the entire building. Then I told him to clear off my property before I had him removed for trespassing. I hold his gaze. He also asked whether I'd put my name to a statement about how you perform on the job. Broderick continues. I told him, I'll write that statement for you right this moment, but I suspect what it says won't be what you came here hoping for. Broderick reaches into his desk drawer and slides a sheet of paper across to me. Typed on warehouse letterhead. To whom it may concern, I read aloud. Gerald Mallory has been employed at this facility for 3 years. His work performance is exemplary. He has never shown signs of confusion, memory impairment, or unsafe behavior. Any claims to the contrary are false and defamatory. Signed, Broderick Gantry, Warehouse Operations Manager. I raise my eyes from the page. Your boy is assembling a case against you, Broderick says. I don't know what's behind it, and I don't need to. But nobody walks onto my floor and expects me to say false things about my people. I fold the letter with care and slide it into my pocket. I say thank you, don't, Broderick says. Just keep punching in on time the way you always have. And if your son comes back around, I'll put that in writing too. I shake his hand. I don't have words for the rest of it, but my roster of witnesses just got one name longer. That night, seated in Aldis's apartment, I spread everything out on the table. The forged signatures, Broderick's flat refusal to play along Pastor Clifton's warning, Odette's photograph of the fraudulent welfare worker, Nadette's referral to Celestine. Your son is racking up mistakes faster than I can catalog them, Aldis says, forging his wife's name, attempting to corrupt witnesses. Every crime he commits piles on top of the last. And every person he tries to bend is writing it down and bringing it straight to you. How much time do we have before he files? I ask. 3 weeks, Aldis estimates. Perhaps fewer. But Jerry, when that day comes, we'll be ready. While my circle of loyal witnesses kept growing, Aldis and Rudy were driving deep into the financial records, hunting for hard numbers Darnell would never be able to talk his way around. Saturday morning. Aldis laid 23 bank withdrawal slips across his dining table. Jerry, your son has been forging your signature for 18 months, Aldis said. 47,000 in federal bank fraud. His home office had been converted into an investigator's command center, documents, timeline charts, and forensic binders covering every surface. Rudy sat across from me, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen in front of him. That old Fifth Third Bank savings account you opened for Vivian back in 1985, Rudy explained, pushing a printout toward me. 23 counter withdrawals over 18 months ranging from $800 to $4,500, totaling $47,000. I stared at the figures. I had never authorized a single one, and I didn't even know the online password. Aldis produced scanned teller slips. The signatures bore a resemblance to mine, but they weren't. The capital H sits at a different angle, and the S loops out too wide. Aldis pointed it out. A handwriting examiner will catch it in under a minute. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 1344, federal bank fraud carries a sentence of up to 30 years in prison. 30 years. Darnell was 38. He'd walk out at 68, my age right now. I didn't want my son behind bars, but he had to be stopped completely and permanently. Celestine needs all of this immediately, Aldis said, sliding the documents into an envelope. When we totaled Darnell's felony exposure, the count stood at corporate identity theft, elder exploitation, 23 counts of bank fraud, 3 counts of document forgery on the guardianship filing, and attempted suborning of false witnesses. On Monday, I took the next step myself. I arranged a face-to-face meeting with Kent Oswald at Keystone Logistics Corporation. Their Covington offices looked out over the ballpark. "Mr. Mallory, we've been trying to reach you for 3 weeks," Kent said, spreading open a portfolio. He told me that someone representing the Mallory estate had come in and tried to negotiate an immediate cash buyout of our West End warehouse using a notarized power of attorney. Kent pushed the document across to me. The signature resembled mine, but their legal team had laid it against Vivian's original 2006 deed. The differences were plain. The newer signature was deliberate, hesitant, and wrong. "We suspended negotiations," Kent said. "Who sent that representative?" "My son," I answered. After a silence that stretched too long, Kent asked whether I still intended to sell. I said yes, directly, clean terms, no go-betweens. We shook on it. Vivian's warehouse was back in motion. That evening I put everything before Celestine. She listened, then gave a smile that carried no warmth at all. "Your son tried to steal a $4.8 million property with a forged document and walked it right into a corporate legal team," she said. "He is writing his own indictment." "When do we act?" I asked. "Soon," Celestine answered. "Let him file the guardianship petition. Let him enter that courtroom, convinced he's holding all the cards. Then we dismantle him one piece at a time." Driving home, I turned over the number 30 years and the image of my son's notarized lies. His greed is composing its own indictment, one forged signature at a time. But while I'd been tracking crimes against Vivian's warehouse, Darnell was moving against something closer. On Wednesday afternoon, Odette called, her voice tight and urgent. "Gerald, there's a car sitting 3 houses down," she said. "A man in it has been photographing your place for 4 days running. I was at the hardware store halfway through my afternoon shift, and I stepped into the back stockroom to take the call." Odette described a dark blue sedan with Ohio plates. The driver had professional camera equipment and was working through every angle of my house. "I'm going out to get his plate," Odette whispered. Through the line, I heard her footsteps, then the snap of her phone camera capturing the man who was doing the capturing. She read me the plate, Echo Bravo 7429, and sent the photo through. I passed the number straight to Aldous. While I waited for him to call back, I stood in that stockroom staring at the walls and thinking about the house. Vivian and I bought it in 1987. We went back and forth over the bedroom paint she put in her favorite lavender, and Darnell took his first steps on the front porch. Now someone was calculating what it would fetch at a distressed sale. 28 minutes later, Aldous rang back. "The vehicle is registered to Crestline Realty Brokerage, a cut-rate liquidation firm that moves estate properties fast at roughly 70% of market value. Someone retained them to appraise the place. Your son intends to sell your home the moment that guardianship order is in his hand. A home of 36 years is not a structure. It is every memory layered into it, every pencil mark measuring a child against a doorframe, the floors that know which boards to press Vivian's lavender. My son was pricing all of it. I need Celestine," I said. She picked up on the second ring. When I walked her through the surveillance, she agreed we had to accelerate. "The irrevocable trust documents," Celestine said. "I've had them in draft for 2 weeks. They move legal ownership of every asset, the warehouse, the house, your savings, into an irrevocable trust, with you holding the lifetime beneficiary interest. Once that's executed, nothing can be touched. Even if guardianship is granted, the trustee holds control, not Darnell." "Who serves as trustee?" I asked. "Paisley, your granddaughter. We'll appoint a professional co-trustee until she turns 18, but the beneficial ownership belongs to her, the way Vivian always meant it to be." What's coming next stopped me cold. when I first understood it. The full picture of what had been done and how far someone was willing to go is worse than I had let myself believe. Before we get there, tell me if you discovered someone close to you had been quietly working against you. Would you confront them immediately or build your case in silence first? We set the signing for Monday morning at 9:00 at her office. She needed 2 witnesses outside the family, so I chose Aldous and Pastor Clifton. Celestine assured me that Rudy had eyes on the court filing system. Darnell hadn't submitted the petition yet. He thought he had runway, but he only had 4 days. That night I drove past the blue sedan. The driver's silhouette sat dark against the fading October light. As I came up my front walk, his camera shutter clicked from 50 ft away. Inside the house carried the smell of old wood and Vivian's lavender. Standing at the kitchen sink, I noticed my hands weren't shaking. 4 days. 4 days to seal my assets before Darnell files. But before I put pen to any legal document, I have to face the thing I've been putting off for 11 years. Friday night, alone in my bedroom under a single yellow desk lamp, I finally unfolded the letter Vivian left me, that quarter-folded page I couldn't bring myself to read, because I understood it would rearrange everything. The envelope had lived in my nightstand drawer since 2012. I've moved it out of the way 10,000 times, reaching past it for reading glasses, chapstick, the television remote. Every time my fingers found the worn paper, I closed the drawer again. Tonight, I open it. The paper separates along 4 careful creases. Vivian's handwriting covers both sides in blue ink, elegant but unsteady. You can see the tremor the medications caused in every loop and curl. She wrote this 3 days before she died. I know because the date is right at the top, May 17th, 2012. Jerry, it begins. She's one of only 2 people, Aldous being the other, who ever called me that. I worry about our boy. That mind of his is razor sharp, sharper than mine ever came close to being sharper than yours. But he's missing the single most essential quality a person can have. He doesn't place any value on the people who sacrifice for him. I've watched him these past few years, the way he speaks about you the moment you leave a room, the way every person and situation gets reduced to dollars and standing. I told myself it was a stage. Young men move through seasons of arrogance. But Jerry, I don't believe this is a stage anymore. I think this is the person he decided to be. My hands aren't steady now. The paper shudders in the lamplight. Chico, the West End warehouse property. You know, the lot I picked up in 2006 with the money from my craft business. You thought I was throwing away our emergency fund on an industrial lot. But Jerry, I bought it because I could see further down the road than you gave me credit for. That warehouse needs to go into a trust for the little ones down the line. Don't let anyone strip away their future, no matter how persuasive the case sounds. I stop reading. Close my eyes. Breathe. You have to understand. Vivian wasn't simply writing a letter. She was constructing a fortress 11 years ahead of time, layer by layer, instruction by instruction. I keep reading. And Jerry, if the day arrives when you have to fight him, and I fear it will fight with nothing but the absolute truth, don't embellish. Don't exaggerate. Don't try to cast yourself in a better light than you deserve. The truth is the one weapon that never needs defending. It stands on its own ground, and it outlasts every lie ever told against it. The letter runs another full-page directions about the warehouse deed, the name of her attorney, a post office box where she kept backup documents I never knew anything about. And then the final line. I love you more than words can carry. You are the finest man I have ever known. Don't let anyone persuade you otherwise. Your Vivian. I fold the letter back along its original creases, press it to my chest, and sit in the dark for hours. She saw it. 11 years ago, when Darnell was 27 and freshly out of business school, Vivian had already read his trajectory. She watched him reduce people to line items. She listened to him speak about me the way you'd talk about a depreciating asset. And she quietly, deliberately left me the precise coordinates I would need to survive. Before Monday morning, I want to tell you a quick note. The next section includes some dramatized details added for emotional impact, but the core truth stands. Monday morning, 10:00 a.m. I'm seated in Celestine Okafor's office on the 18th floor, the Ohio River visible through the glass behind her. Celestine slides a document across the desk. Final irrevocable trust agreement, she says. Execution draft. Read every word. Don't rush. I go through every clause with slow, deliberate attention. It takes 40 minutes. The document moves every asset I hold out of my name and into a closed trust. The warehouse, my home, my savings accounts, everything. The beneficiary, Paisley Mallory, my 9-year-old granddaughter. The structure is irrevocable, cannot be amended, cannot be undone, cannot be reached by any party, including me. I sign on page 12. The notary stamps the pages immediately. That sound, a solid mechanical thunk, just placed everything Darnell thought he was going to claim beyond his reach. As of this precise moment, Celestine says, Gerald Darnell has absolutely nothing left to steal. Even if he somehow secures a guardianship order, he might have some authority over you, but not over what you own. Not over Paisley's inheritance. The trust holds it now. He cannot touch it. Not ever. I stand, shake her hand, step out of the high-rise into the crisp Cincinnati autumn air. My phone buzzes. A text from Darnell. Hey, Dad, I need to go over some important health and legacy paperwork with you this weekend. There are some documents that need your signature for estate planning purposes. Can we meet Saturday afternoon, maybe at your place? I'll bring lunch. I read the message twice. Health and legacy paperwork. Estate planning purposes. He's going to hand me the guardianship documents. Probably tucked into a stack of things that look official and benign. Sign here, Dad. And here. Just routine. Don't bother reading the whole thing. Except there's nothing left to sign away. The warehouse transferred this morning to an irrevocable trust. The house, same trust. The savings accounts, every dollar sealed past his reach as of 10:17 a.m. today. I type back. Sure, son. Saturday works. See you then. I pocket the phone. You're too late, Darnell. The papers are signed. The assets are gone. And you don't have any idea. Darnell has no idea the documents are executed and the assets are out of reach. But while he prepares his play for Saturday, I have to go collect what Vivian scattered across 11 years before she left. Tuesday afternoon, I drive out to Delhi Township to find Wendell Craddock, the man who stood beside me for 23 years in the Cincinnati steel mills. The man my wife entrusted with her final secret. Wendell lives in a modest ranch house on a quiet street where American flags hang from every third porch. 2 years since I last saw him. The mills shut in 2001, and the way men drift apart when the only thing connecting them disappears, that's what happened to us. I knock. He opens the door, peers at me through thick glasses, then something behind his eyes shifts into recognition. Oh, Jerry, he says. Lord Jerry, is that really you? It's me, Wendell. He pulls me into a hug. His hands shake faintly, age maybe the start of arthritis. 23 years we stood side by side in those mills, breathing in steel dust and heat. He held Vivian's secret for over a decade without a single word slipping out. Come in, he says. I've been expecting you. I have, and Vivian told me to pass something along only when you truly needed it, Wendell says, leading me down a narrow hallway toward his bedroom. I figure that moment is now. He lowers himself slowly, carefully, and opens a compact steel lockbox under the floorboards. Inside sits a thick, pristine envelope sealed with blue wax. Vivian's handwriting on the front, for Raymond Mallory to be opened when necessary. Wendell holds it out to me. Original copy of Vivian's last will and testament, he says. Executed in 2007. 2 independent witnesses. I was one of them. The other was her attorney, Dorinda Claxton, but she passed away in 2015. I break the seal. The document inside is legal-size, professionally drafted, notarized. I read the critical paragraph 3 times. I, Vivian Marie Mallory, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my interest in the commercial property located at 2200 Guest Street, West End Warehouse, Lot 47B, Cincinnati, Ohio, to a protective trust to be established for the benefit of any grandchildren born after my death. This property shall bypass my son Darnell Mallory entirely, and shall not be subject to claims by creditors, spouses, or legal guardians. The trustee shall be appointed by my husband, Raymond Mallory, at his sole discretion. How did Vivian see so far ahead? How did she know 11 years before this moment exactly what I was going to need? She asked me to keep this well away from the house, Wendell says quietly. She told me just in case Darnell goes through drawers after I'm gone. I take the envelope. My wife was fighting in my corner from 11 years in the grave. Thank you, Wendell, I say. You in some kind of trouble, Jerry? I was, I say. But I'm handling it. Saturday afternoon. I drive to the Carew Tower Residences Park and visitor parking ride the elevator to the 14th floor. I knock on Darnell's door at exactly 2:00 p.m. It swings open. My granddaughter Paisley, 9 years old, launches herself at me with a force that nearly takes my breath. She still believes in goodness. She still trusts that adults tell the truth. "Oh, Grandpa!" she shouts. "Hey, sweetheart," I say, dropping to one knee to hold her properly. Darnell comes out of the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear, holding up a finger to say he'll be just a moment. Everything about him reads relaxed, certain, the posture of a man who's convinced he's already won. Paisley steers me into the corner of the living room where her toys are spread across the floor. She leans in, close voice, barely above a breath. "Grandpa, yesterday, I was watching cartoons on my tablet in my room, and Daddy was talking really loud in the living room with another man. He sounded scary. I hit the voice recorder button because I was frightened. I want you to hear it." She puts the tablet in my hands. I slip the small pink headphones over my ears. Darnell's voice comes through unmistakable. Why I need to prove the old man lacks independent capacity. The medical assessments we arranged will show progressive cognitive decline. We file the petition 3 weeks from Tuesday, which gives us time to line up all the supporting affidavits. A second voice, older, measured Attorney Graywell, shot in the house appraisal, already handled, Darnell says. Crestline Realty puts it at $320,000. We can move it within 2 weeks of guardianship approval. The warehouse is the real target, $4.8 million. We route it through a shell trust I control, pull the proceeds out over 18 months, so we don't trigger any tax flags. What about the daughter, O. Paisley? She's 9. Courts don't put stock in what a 9-year-old says, and Solange will back whatever position I take. She trusts me completely. I keep my face still, not a flicker. I pull off the headphones and hold her close. You handled that perfectly, sweetheart, I tell her quietly. Can I take the recording with me? She nods. I move the audio file over to my phone. 43 minutes of Darnell and Graywell laying out the entire fraud in precise detail. The timeline, the dollar figures, the strategy, every step of it. Darnell comes back into the living room, pocketing his phone. "Oh, you're already here, Dad," he says, catching himself. "Why didn't you ring the bell?" I rise from the chair with a slow, deliberate movement and give him an empty smile. "Slipped my mind," I say gently. "You know how I've been lately." Darnell laughs, fully at ease. He believes he is looking at exactly what he described to Graywell, a fading old man, foggy, simple to manage. "No problem at all, Dad," he says. "Come over and sit down. I brought lunch. We just need to go over a few things." He waves toward the dining table where a neat stack of papers sits next to deli sandwiches and water bottles. I sit. I eat half a sandwich. I nod along and keep a soft smile on my face while he walks me through various forms requiring my signature for estate planning purposes. My pen stays in my pocket. "Actually, Darnell," I say after about 20 minutes, "I'm getting a little tired. Think we could pick this up another time? I'd like to take these home and have a proper look through them first." "Of course, Dad," Darnell says, and I catch the brief shadow that crosses his face. "No rush whatsoever. Take all the time you need." I say goodbye to Paisley. She holds on tight before she lets go. I drive home with the audio file sitting on my phone. That night, I send it to Aldous, then to Celestine Okafor. I sit at the kitchen table with Vivian's original will in front of me and Paisley's recording on my phone. My 9-year-old granddaughter, scared innocent just trying to capture a cartoon on her tablet, has handed me the one thing that will collapse my son's entire scheme. Paisley's recording gave me 43 minutes of Darnell mapping out fraud in his own voice, but audio by itself isn't enough. Courts want documentary evidence, forensic numbers that can't be argued with. The subpoena arrived 72 hours after Paisley's recording, and I held that single page like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls, because in family court, bank records do not lie, and liars cannot hide behind charm when federal documentation starts talking. Monday morning, October 20th, I meet Celestine at her office. She slides the approved subpoena across the desk. "Fifth Third Bank," she says. "Court-ordered disclosure of all transaction records on your legacy savings account. Every withdrawal, every signature, every IP address and geolocation tag associated with the account." She nods toward a woman seated beside the desk with a laptop open in front of her. "This is Tamsin Elroy, bank fraud analyst. I've brought her on as our expert witness." Tamsin, mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, carrying the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who lives inside spreadsheets, looks up at me. "Mr. Mallory," she says, "once those records come through the paper trail, we'll lay out everything. For the signature forgeries, we establish those through forensic handwriting analysis. The IP addresses will tell us exactly where each transaction originated. The withdrawal pattern will demonstrate systematic theft carried out over time. This is hard technical evidence that your son acted without your knowledge or authorization." I can feel the walls drawing in around Darnell from every direction. Not just personal testimony anymore. Financial forensics, numbers, timestamps, digital fingerprints. My son robbed me of two things, my trust and my money. But he forgot that I spent 31 years in construction, where you count every nail and measure twice before you cut. Tamsin angles her laptop toward me. On the screen is a sample transaction log pulled from a prior case. Just look at these timestamps," she says, pointing to one line. 3:47 a.m. If we can place you somewhere else at that hour, asleep on a shift, anywhere with a verifiable alibi, the forgery is self-evident. I lean in. The cells on the spreadsheet glow with cold, numerical certainty. Every row is a theft. Every column is a lie. "The geolocation data," Tamsin continues, "will show which IP address initiated the online banking session. If it traces back to your son's home while you were provably elsewhere, that is prosecutable evidence on its own. I reach out and lay my hand on the subpoena. The court seal is raised, pressed deep into the heavy paper. I can feel the authority in it, the weight of it. Celestine's office carries the smell of fresh ink and well-worn law books, the scent of accountability arriving at last. When do the records come in? I ask. 10 business days, Celestine says. The fifth third has to comply within 2 weeks of service. We'll have everything by early November. Meanwhile, across the city, in a place I've never set foot, something else is already in motion. Reginald Vanthorpe sits in his penthouse office on the 40th floor of Vanthorpe Group headquarters, reading a private investigator's report spread open on his desk. He commissioned the background check 3 weeks ago, not because fraud had crossed his mind, not yet. He'd simply noticed some irregular financial patterns in the division Darnell oversees. Small things. Expense reports that didn't quite reconcile. Nothing he could point to directly. Just a feeling that something was slightly off. The investigator's report is thorough. Page 4 carries the line that changes everything. Subject's father, Gerald Raymond Mallory, aged 67, owns commercial warehouse property at 2200 Guest Street, West End Warehouse, Lot 47B, Cincinnati, Ohio. Assessed value $4.8 million. Acquired outright in 2006. No mortgage, no liens. Clear title. Reginald reads that paragraph 3 times. $4.8 million owned free and clear since 2006. No mortgage. He runs back through every conversation he's had with Darnell over the past 2 years. The story Darnell had carefully assembled: struggling father, financial dependent, cognitive decline, a constant drain requiring support. I'm basically the one keeping him afloat, Darnell said once over drinks at the club. My father made some poor choices after my mother died. Went through most of what he had. Now I'm the one making sure the bills get paid. Reginald had accepted it without question. Why wouldn't he? Darnell was sharp, well-presented, driven. He spoke about family responsibility with real conviction. But a man who holds nearly $5 million in commercial property with no debt against it is not a broken-down dependent. One of these facts makes the other a fabrication. Reginald pours himself a 21-year Glenfarclas. The amber liquid catches the afternoon light angling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looks out over the Cincinnati skyline. He built everything he has by reading people accurately, by distinguishing real character from a polished act, by knowing who was genuine and who was performing. Darnell had looked golden, articulate, hungry in the right way. Family-centered, forever talking about looking after his wife's people, making certain the old man was properly cared for. But the data on the page tears that story apart. Reginald thinks of his own daughter from whom he's been estranged. They haven't spoken in 6 years. He wonders whether he accepted Darnell's character at face value because Darnell gave him something to fill that absence, a surrogate son, to invest in the kind of relationship he'd forfeited when his daughter stopped picking up the phone. The whiskey tastes like something expensive and regretted. He picks up his phone, dials a number from the investigator's report. I walk out of Celestine's office at 2:30 p.m. The subpoena is filed. The expert witness is locked in. Paisley's recording is transcribed and catalogued. Vivian's original will is copied and notarized. Every piece is in position. I check my phone as I cross the lot toward my truck. One missed call. Cincinnati number, no name attached. Voicemail waiting. I press play. Mr. Mallory, this is Reginald Vanthorpe. I believe we need to speak about your son and my company. I have concerns. Please call me back at your earliest opportunity. My direct line is, I checked the timestamp. October 22nd, 2:34 p.m. 16 minutes ago. My pulse kicks hard. Reginald Vanthorpe, the billionaire, Darnell's father-in-law, The man whose name and fortune Darnell has been using as a weapon against me for years. The ultimate patron. The last line of protection. And he's calling me directly. Not through attorneys, not through Solange, not through any corporate intermediary. Man to man. I stare at the number on the screen. My thumb hovers over the callback button. Behind me, Pendleton traffic roars past. Trucks, cars, the noise of a neighborhood that earns its living. In front of me, the most powerful man in Darnell's world waits on the other end of a phone. Either I'm about to hear from a tycoon's lawyers or the king just figured out he crowned a fraud. I press call. 2 rings and Reginald Vanthorpe picks up. His voice is measured and deliberate, the register of a man who built his fortune by taking people's measure. Hello, Mr. Mallory, I'll be direct. I know about your warehouse property. I know my son-in-law told me you were living off his generosity. One of those facts turns the other into a lie, and I don't keep liars in my family or my business. We talk for 18 minutes. I give him nothing he can't verify on his own. When the call wraps up, Reginald leaves me with a single line. We'll speak again face to face and soon. 2 days later, Odette rang me at dawn with 2 words she knows. I'm at my kitchen table, coffee halfway to my mouth. Who knows what Graywell and Fitch Legal sent Solange a formal letter, Odette says breathless, requesting her signature confirmation on guardianship affidavits, documents she never laid eyes on. Never signed? The letter came this morning. I watched her open it on her terrace through my telephoto lens. Her hands were shaking. I set my coffee down. Where is she now? Still reading, Odette says. Wait, Darnell just stepped out onto the terrace. He sees the letter, his face, oh Gerald, his face just drained white. I hear Odette's breath catch. She's yelling, Odette whispers. I can't make out the words, but she's yelling. Darnell's trying to settle her down. She just threw the letter at him. Solange's bewilderment curdled into horror the moment that letter registered. Documents carrying her signature. Court filings she'd never seen. Legal instruments she'd never put her hand to. Her own husband had forged her name on federal documents. What's Darnell saying? I ask. Odette goes quiet a moment. He's gesturing defensive. Wait, I can read his lips. He just said something about protecting her, about your dementia, about Paisley's future. Solange's answer must have been unambiguous because Odette whispers she just said felony. I saw the word. You forged my signature on court documents. That is a felony, Darnell. A felony. I stand at my kitchen window watching October rain drag itself down the glass, thinking about the woman who just discovered what she married. Solange was collateral damage in her own home. She loved a fiction and bound herself to a fraud. She never had a fair shot against Darnell's performance, same as I hadn't. Odette calls again 3 hours later. She left, Odette says. Drove straight to a Starbucks parking lot in Oakley, sat there in her car for 20 minutes, then made a call. My plate reader tracked her next stop, Ashworth and Row, the building on 6th Avenue. Ashworth and Row, I repeat. Cincinnati's premier high-asset marital dissolution firm, Odette says. Kalinda Ashworth, senior partner. She handled the Rothman divorce 3 years ago. $47 million settlement. I close my eyes. Solange booked an appointment for November 3rd. The billionaire's daughter is divorcing my son, and Darnell has no idea the walls are converging on him from every side. Monday morning, October 27th. I'm seated in Keystone Logistics' conference room over in Covington. Floor-to-ceiling windows take in the Ohio River. Celestine sits beside me, a leather portfolio of documents laid open in front of her. Kent Oswald, Vice President of Acquisitions, enters carrying 2 copies of the asset purchase agreement. Mid-50s gray at the temples, the kind of professional who treats every closing like it deserves old-school ceremony. Mr. Mallory, he says, gripping my hand. I've been in commercial real estate for 30 years. I have never encountered a cleaner title or a better maintained property. It's been a privilege. I sit. Celestine slides the contract in front of me. I read every page. It takes 20 minutes. The terms are plain. Sale price $4.8 million. 30% escrow wired at signing. Remaining balance upon title clearance in 60 days. 30% of $4.8 million is $1.44 million. That money transfers directly into Paisley's irrevocable trust account. Not under my name. Outside Darnell's reach. Untouchable. I sign on page 17. The wire confirmation appears on Celestine's laptop like a digital fortress wall going up. $144 million. 7 figures. Paisley Mallory, sole beneficiary. Numbers that mean Darnell's grasp stops here permanently. The wire confirmed. Celestine says quiet and even. $144 million in Paisley's trust. Untouchable. Vivian's legacy is protected. I think about my wife. About the warehouse she picked up in 2006 with the proceeds from her craft business. About the letter she wrote telling me to shield the little ones. About every beam and brick of that building standing as a guardian over our granddaughter's future. Vivienne. I kept my promise. Our granddaughter will never have to need anything from him. Kent Oswald stands and reaches across one more time. Congratulations, Mr. Mallory, he says. The property passes to Keystone Logistics as of today. The remaining balance will clear escrow by mid-December. You should be proud of what you built. My wife built it, I say. I'm just making certain it goes where she always meant it to go. I walk out of Keystone Logistics into the crisp October air. The Ohio River runs gray and steady at my back. Cincinnati spreads across the hills in every direction. My phone buzzes. An email. Subject line, Re Darnell Mallory. Confidential discussion. Urgent. Sender Lucretia Vanthorpe, Executive Assistant, to Reginald Vanthorpe. Mr. Mallory. Mr. Vanthorpe requests an in-person meeting tomorrow. Tuesday, October 28th, at 10:00 a.m., Vanthorpe Group Headquarters. 40th floor, Executive Suite. Please confirm your availability at your earliest convenience. This matter is time-sensitive and confidential. I read it twice. Tomorrow morning, Vanthorpe Group Headquarters, 40th floor, the billionaire's inner sanctum. I just moved $144 million in a single morning. Signed documents that locked down my granddaughter's future. Watched my son's wife discover he's a felon. And now I'm heading into a meeting with the most powerful man in Cincinnati. Not as a destitute father-in-law with his hat in hand. Not as the muddled old man Darnell described to anyone who'd listen. As a man who holds the deed to his own story. I type back, confirmed. I will be there. I pocket my phone and head toward my truck. Tomorrow I sit across from Reginald Vanthorpe and hand him the truth about his son-in-law. And the truth, the way Vivian set it down 11 years ago, is the one weapon that never needs defending. The invitation came on Monday, November 3rd. Heavy cardstock embossed gold lettering. The Vanthorpe Foundation cordially invites you to the annual Thanksgiving Gala, November 27th, 7:00 p.m. Grand Ballroom, Hilton, Cincinnati, Netherland Plaza. Black tie optional. I set it on the kitchen counter beside Vivian's photograph and wondered whether she'd ever pictured this me in a tuxedo at a table surrounded by Cincinnati's wealthiest families while our son schemed to strip away what she'd built. 5 days had passed since my meeting with Reginald Vanthorpe. I'd arrived at his offices at 10:00 a.m. Sharp-ridden the elevator to the 40th floor, walked past glass walls overlooking the Ohio. His assistant Lucretia had led me into a conference room where Reginald sat alone. No lawyers, no advisor, just a 73-year-old billionaire with one question. Why should I believe you? I handed him the forensic report Tams and Elroy had assembled. 23 forged signatures, $47,000 drained across 18 months, the forged power of attorney Darnell used in his attempt to sell Vivian's warehouse, the guardianship petition listing Solange's signature that she had never placed there. Because your daughter didn't know, I said. And when it all comes out, she's going to need you. Reginald sat with the documents for 11 minutes without a word. Then he looked up. What is it you want from me? Nothing, I said. I want you to know what's true before the hearing. That's all. He walked me to this door himself. Shook my hand. The foundation gala is November 27th. You'll get an invitation. I'd like you there. Not a request, an alliance. The proof of it came on cardstock and gold leaf. Tuesday afternoon, I was working a sink trap at the Oakley duplex when Celestine called. Solange Vanthorpe just retained Ashworth and Rowe, she said. Kalinda Ashworth handles high-asset divorces only. She doesn't accept cases under $2 million. I tightened the slip nut, tested the joint. How did you find out? Because Kalinda called me this morning asking whether we'd share discovery on the forgery evidence, Celestine said. Solange saw the Graywell and Fitch letter regarding the guardianship petition. She put the pieces together. I wiped my hands on my work pants. What did you say that I'd take it up with my client? Celestine said. Gerald, this works in our favor. If Solange files first, Darnell loses his credible witness. No court is going to give weight to a son whose wife is divorcing him over fraud. She has children, I said. This will damage them. Darnell damaged them, Celestine said quietly. You're just the one who refused to look the other way. Wednesday morning, I drove out to my security shift. Aldous was waiting at the loading dock, a coffee in each hand. You look worn out, he said. 5 jobs, I said. 67 years old. Do the math. He passed me the coffee. My daughter called me yesterday. Asked whether I knew Gerald Mallory. Aldous had spent 32 years in fraud investigation before he retired. His daughter was a paralegal at Graywell and Fitch. What did you tell her? That you're the most honest man I've ever come across, Aldous said. And that if your son filed guardianship papers, there's more to the story. He took a slow sip of coffee. She said the petition cites cognitive decline, fall risk, financial mismanagement. She said Darnell's attorney has hospital records, incident reports, witness statements. Aldous, he has a TikTok clip of me stumbling over a garden hose, I said. And a warehouse manager who refused to lie on his behalf. But she also told me Solange came into the office Monday, Aldous said. Wanted to look at the guardianship file. When she spotted her own signature on the consent form, the color drained right out of her face. She asked for copies of everything. Walked out without a single word. I watched a delivery truck ease back into the loading bay. She didn't sign it. I know, Aldous said. And now she does too. That afternoon, Odette Carmody called. There's something I have to tell you, she said. I met Solange this morning, at Alt Park. I lowered myself into the seat of my truck. You went to her. No, she came to me, Odette said. Someone passed her my number. She wanted to understand about the fake social worker, about Darnell's visits, about you. Odette's voice went quiet. Gerald, I told her everything. About the groceries you put on your tab for Darnell in college. The car you repaired so he could make it to his first job. The tuition you covered when his scholarship fell short of summer classes. The hospital bills from Vivian's cancer that you're still carrying. Why, Odette? She didn't know, Odette said. She believed you were wealthy. She believed Darnell had put himself through school. She thought the warehouse was something Vivian inherited, not something the two of you built from nothing. Odette paused. She wept, Gerald, right there on the park bench. She said, "He told me his father was selfish. He told me his father never helped him. He told me his father didn't deserve anything." I shut my eyes. 18 years of Darnell's marriage, and Solange had been living inside a story that cast me as the villain of my own sacrifice. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "The truth," Odette said. "That you're the best father Darnell never deserved." I sat in that truck for 20 minutes after the call ended. The invitation was still lying on my passenger seat. The Van Thorpe Foundation Annual Thanksgiving Gala. 7:00 p.m. Black tie optional. Vivian used to say, the truth didn't need defending, it just needed witnessing. I'd spent 6 weeks pulling together evidence, building a circle of allies, shielding everything we'd worked for from Darnell's reach. I'd signed away every asset we'd built together to keep it out of his hands. I'd pushed myself past exhaustion to fund the fight he'd forced me into. Now his wife understood the real price of his lies. I picked the invitation up off the seat. November 27th, 3 weeks out. By then the court hearing would be behind me, the forensic evidence submitted, the bank records subpoenaed. By then Solange would have filed divorce papers or chosen to stand beside the man who'd forged her name. By then I'd know whether the truth was going to be enough. My phone buzzed. Text from Celestine. Emergency hearing moved up. Judge Carrington wants both parties in chambers. Friday, November 7th, 9 a.m. Darnell's attorney filed a motion to accelerate on grounds of immediate danger to the ward. 4 days. They were picking up speed. Deshaun Waverly recognized the law firm's name the instant he scanned the delivery address. Graywell and Fitch Legal, Northside, Cincinnati. The same outfit Gerald had mentioned 3 weeks back when Deshaun had stopped by to apologize for the TikTok video that blew up. He pulled his delivery van to the curb at 6:45. Friday morning, grabbed the express envelope marked Priority Court Filing. The lobby receptionist barely raised her eyes. Signature here. Deshaun signed the tablet, then let his phone slip from his pocket while he bent to pick it up. 2 seconds, camera angled at the open delivery ledger on the counter. The notation read, Emergency Guardianship Petition Hearing. Scheduled November 26, 2022, 9:00 a.m. Hamilton County Probate Court Judge Carrington presiding. He was back in his van texting before the receptionist looked up. Graywell and Fitch just took an express delivery. Ledger shows court filing package expedited status. Photographed everything. I was swapping out a water heater in Norwood when my phone went off. I read Deshaun's message twice, then dialed Aldous. He's timing the guardianship filing to Thanksgiving week, I said. The gala announcement and the court action were running in lockstep. Aldis's voice flattened the way it used to when he was working fraud cases. Malice aforethought documented. This gives us premeditation for fraud charges. Northside Diner, 30 minutes. I finished seating the pressure relief valve, tested for leaks, collected my $75 and drove. The diner booth smelled of scorched coffee and 40 years of bacon grease. Aldous fanned Deshaun's photographs across a Formica tabletop, scarred by decades of truckers' elbows, evidence spread where working people eat breakfast, not in any boardroom. The timestamp on the delivery ledger read 6:47 a.m. The court docket notation confirmed what I'd already put together. November 26th hearing, November 27th gala. Aldous said. He wants the judge's signature before the champagne is poured. I stared at the photograph. My son had orchestrated this with the same precision Vivian once used to plan our anniversary dinners, every detail coordinated, every player placed, every moment staged for maximum effect. "He's not just trying to steal my granddaughter," I said. "He's staging a public execution." Aldous stirred sugar into coffee that didn't call for it. We file counter petition November 18th. Bank fraud evidence, signature forgery, witness testimony. Celestine's briefs will hit like a freight train. He looked up. "Gerald, you understand what he's going for here. He gets guardianship declared the day before Thanksgiving, then rises at the Van Thorpe Foundation Gala in front of 200 of Cincinnati's wealthiest families and announces he's assumed legal custody of his cognitively impaired father. Solange's family applauds his filial devotion. Reginald Van Thorpe shakes his hand. The society pages run it Sunday morning. While I'm legally incompetent to contest anything," I said. "And while you're legally barred from acting on my behalf," Aldous said. "Can't retain attorneys, can't touch bank accounts, can't make a single medical decision. He controls Paisley, controls the guardianship, controls the entire narrative." Aldous slid the photographs across to me. "Except he has no idea about the forensic accountant, the signature analysis, the warehouse sale, or the 43-minute recording his daughter made." I lifted my coffee. It had gone cold. "Celestine files November 18th, Aldous said. "That gives Darnell 8 days to mount a defense against 23 counts of forgery and $47,000 in documented theft. Judge Carrington will have our evidence packet 72 hours before the hearing. What if the judge doesn't read it? Then Celestine stands up November 26th and moves to admit Exhibit A through Exhibit R into evidence," Aldous said. "Darnell's attorney will object. The judge will overrule, and your son will watch his choreography fall apart in real time." I drove toward Hyde Park thinking about calendars. 12 days until Thanksgiving. 12 days until Darnell tried to crown himself in front of 200 witnesses who had no idea they'd gathered for an execution that had already been called off. Vivian used to mark dates that mattered in red pen on the kitchen calendar. Our anniversary, Darnell's birthday, the day we put our names on the warehouse lease. She believed in marking things, the good ones and the hard ones alike. I wondered what color pen she'd have chosen for November 26th. Saturday afternoon, I picked Paisley up for our weekend visitation. Solange met me at the door, her expression carefully neutral. 4-0, she said. Not a minute after. Paisley climbed into my truck, holding her stuffed elephant. We drove to the public park near the synagogue, the one with swings that didn't squeak. A November wind pushed leaves across the empty playground. I pushed her on the swing for 10 minutes, steady rhythm, her laughter bright against the gray sky. Then she dragged her feet through the wood chips, came to a stop, and turned to look at me with eyes exactly like Vivian's. "Grandpa, why does Daddy tell everyone you can't remember things?" Her voice was steady, none of a child's tentativeness in it. "You remember everything." I crouched down in the wood chips to meet her at eye level. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "You remember my exact birthday," Paisley said. June 14th. "You remember my favorite colors, purple and silver. You remember my first grade teacher's name was Mrs. Kowalski. You remember everything." The wind cut straight through my jacket. I reached out and took her small hands in mine. "I remember everything," I said. "I will always remember you." Paisley gave a slow nod, a gravity in it that belonged to someone much older, and something in my chest gave way. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I kept the recording for you." I pulled her close while the November wind moved across the empty playground, carrying the smell of dying leaves and the edge of coming winter. She locked her arms around my neck and whispered against my shoulder, "I chose you, Grandpa." At 4:00, I brought her back to the house on Grandin Road. Solange took Paisley's hand without lifting her eyes to mine. I drove home through the November dusk, with my eyes drifting to the rearview mirror. Paisley would be sitting down to dinner by now, doing her homework, getting ready for bed. In 12 days, Darnell would stand in the Hilton Cincinnati Netherland Plaza Grand Ballroom and make his announcement, except Judge Carrington would already have seen the bank fraud evidence, the signature forgery documentation, and a 9-year-old's recorded testimony. I glanced at the empty passenger seat where Vivian used to sit. She chose us. The nameplate on the bench read, Honorable Harriet Aldcroft, and her expression made clear she'd already fielded more than enough nonsense for one Wednesday morning. She had presided over Hamilton County Probate Court for 17 years and could smell a bad faith petition before opening arguments were finished. I sat beside Celestine at the respondents' table, a manila folder thick with documentation laid out between us. Across the aisle, Darnell sat with Graywell, senior partner at Graywell and Fitch Legal, who built his reputation on high-stakes guardianship work and rarely came out on the losing end. Except that was about to change. Mr. Graywell, Judge Aldcroft said, your emergency petition cites cognitive decline, fall risk, and financial mismanagement. Yet the hearing was originally calendared for November 26th. What changed? Graywell rose and straightened his tie. New evidence came to our attention regarding immediate danger to the proposed ward, Your Honor. We felt it necessary to move the timeline up. Ms. Okafor. Judge Aldcroft cut him off. Celestine stood with the composure of someone holding 4 aces. Your Honor, the petitioner alleges cognitive impairment, while the record reflects systematic financial fraud. Mr. Mallory's mental sharpness is not at issue here, his son's criminal intent is. She slid the first exhibit onto the bench. Neurological evaluation dated November 10th, signed by Dr. Bertram Quincy at UC Medical Center. Cognitive function, normal. Memory assessment, excellent. Recommendation, no limitations. Stutihum. The petitioner further claims financial mismanagement. Celestine continued. Yet Mr. Mallory carries perfect credit, meets every obligation on schedule, and recently executed a sophisticated, irrevocable trust to protect his minor granddaughter's inheritance. Exhibit B credit report pristine. Exhibit C trust documents notarized and filed. Your Honor, I'd like to call Wendell Craddock to the stand. Wendell had worked alongside me for 23 years in the Cincinnati steel mills and still showed up for coffee every Thursday without fail. He took the witness stand in his good khakis, work-calloused hands steady on the Bible. Mr. Craddock, how long have you known Gerald Mallory? 23 years in the mills, and we've kept up the friendship ever since, Wendell said. Have you observed any cognitive decline, memory loss, or impaired judgment? Wendell glanced at Darnell, then at me, then back at Celestine. No, ma'am. Gerald remembers things I forgot I ever told him. Just last Thursday he reminded me about my grandson's baseball tournament that had completely slipped my mind. One more question, Celestine said. Does Mr. Mallory require any assistance managing his daily affairs? He works 5 jobs, Wendell said. I'm retired and I can barely keep pace with the man. Judge Aldcroft made a note. Graywell shifted in his seat. Celestine returned to our table and drew out the forensic analysis. Your Honor, the true purpose behind this petition isn't protection, it's concealment. The petitioner, Darnell Mallory, forged his father's signature 23 times over 18 months, embezzling $47,000 from joint accounts established to cover his late mother's medical expenses. The courtroom carried the smell of old varnish and institutional carpet cleaner. I watched Graywell shuffle papers with unsteady hands, the sound of an expensive legal strategy folding in on itself. Additionally, Celestine said, Mr. Darnell Mallory forged his wife's signature on this very guardianship petition. She has filed for legal separation citing fraud and forgery. Exhibit G signature analysis showing Solange's name written by Darnell. Exhibit H separation papers filed November 20th. Judge Aldcroft set down her reading glasses. Mr. Graywell, does your client wish to respond to these allegations? Graywell leaned over and whispered urgently to Darnell. My son's face had gone white. We request a continuance, Your Honor, to review hunting. Denied. Judge Aldcroft's voice was flat. This petition alleges Mr. Gerald Mallory poses an immediate danger to himself and requires emergency intervention. The evidence before me shows no cognitive impairment, no financial mismanagement, and substantial documentation of the petitioner's own criminal conduct. She stamped the file. Petition denied with prejudice. Mr. Mallory retains full legal autonomy and custody rights regarding his minor granddaughter. Graywell leaned toward Darnell. I caught the whisper from 3 feet away. With prejudice means we can't refile. It's over. I walked out of the courthouse at 11:15 on a Wednesday morning. The guardianship weapon Darnell had spent 6 weeks constructing had been dismantled in 40 minutes. That afternoon, Celestine called. AG's office confirmed receipt, she said. They're opening a formal investigation into the bank fraud and embezzlement. FBI Cincinnati field office is reviewing the interstate wire transfers from the warehouse sale attempt. I sat in my truck outside the Oakley duplex where I'd just repaired a furnace. They already have the evidence. Delivered Monday, Celestine said. Your civil case and the criminal investigation are running on parallel tracks now. What happens Thursday at the gala is a separate matter, but law enforcement already knows everything Darnell tried to bury. Thursday I got a text from Reginald Vanthorpe. I won't be at Thanksgiving dinner. My presence would complicate your moment. But my statement is on file with your attorney. Good luck, Gerald. I stared at that message for 5 minutes. A billionaire I'd met exactly once had chosen to take the word of a 74-year-old maintenance man over his own son-in-law. Friday, Solange's separation papers became public record. I heard it from Odette, who got it from her sister, whose daughter worked at the courthouse. Saturday, I worked all 5 jobs. Sunday, I went to early mass and lit a candle for Vivian. Monday, I bought a new shirt for Wednesday's gala. Tuesday, I pressed my only suit. Wednesday evening, Aldous and Odette arrived at my kitchen at 6:00 p.m. I'd made stew, 3 ingredients, nothing elaborate. We sat around the worn wooden table Vivian and I had picked up at a yard sale in 1979. Aldous set the master evidence folder on the table. 1 copy to the AG, 1 to the FBI, 1 in your pocket. Everything documented, everything duplicated. The stew bubbled on my old stove, filling the kitchen with warmth. No complexity, no performance, just exactly what it was. Everything Darnell never grasped about integrity. Tomorrow you walk into that ballroom, Odette said, and you tell the truth. That's all Vivian ever asked. Just tell the truth. Aldous raised his tea mug. To Vivian. We drank in silence. Beyond the window, the first snow had begun dusting Cincinnati's November darkness. They left at 8:00. I washed the dishes at the sink, watching snowflakes catch the glow of the streetlight. The evidence folder sat on the table in its manila envelope, 147 pages, that would turn the Hilton Cincinnati Netherland Plaza Grand Ballroom into something Darnell never saw coming. Vivian's photograph watched from the counter. 11 years she'd been gone. 11 years of working 5 jobs to keep up with her medical bills while our son laid plans to take everything we'd built. Tomorrow, I'd walk into a room of 200 Cincinnati elite in cocktail attire and speak the truth. She never got to hear that our son was a thief, that his wife was leaving him, that I had shielded our granddaughter from his greed. Tomorrow the truth got spoken in front of witnesses. I dried the last bowl, folded the dish towel, switched off the kitchen light. Tomorrow I walked into the Hilton Cincinnati Netherland Plaza Grand Ballroom at exactly 6 O's, wearing my only suit and carrying 30 years of truth in a manila envelope. Crystal chandeliers threw warm light across 200 Cincinnati elite in black tie champagne flutes, catching reflections like promises. A string quartet tuned in the corner. The room hummed with wealth and anticipation. Vivian, I walked into ballrooms with you for 40 years. Tonight I walk in alone, but you're here anyway. I spotted Darnell across the room in a bespoke tuxedo that probably cost what I earned in 3 months. He was laughing with a cluster of investors' gestures, broad teeth bright against his tan. Then he saw me. His smile locked for half a second, pure panic crossing his face like a flash of lightning, before settling into something worse, predatory confidence. He figured I'd come in alone and defeated exactly the setup he'd designed for my humiliation. I accepted a glass of water from a passing server and took stock of the room. The head table displayed place cards in elegant calligraphy. I counted the seats. Reginald Vanthorpe's name sat at the center position, flanked by family. But the chair was empty, pulled back as though waiting for someone who would never arrive. The billionaire had declared his allegiance by refusing his own seat. Anyone paying attention would read that absence like a front-page headline. Cincinnati's wealthiest patriarch doesn't skip his own foundation's Thanksgiving gala without cause. The empty chair said more than any prepared statement ever could. I pressed my hand against the envelope inside my jacket. 47 pages. Everything documented, everything true. And this is Gerald. Darnell's voice carried across 15 feet of marble floor. He came toward me with arms open as though we were old friends picking up where we'd left off. I'm so glad you made it. Come, there are people I want you to meet. He guided me toward a ring of investors near the bar. I recognized the type-tailored suits, easy posture, the particular looseness of people who had never once fretted over grocery money. Everyone, this is Gerald. Darnell said, his warmth tuned to sound genuine to anyone who didn't know the man underneath it. An old friend who worked as our live-in handyman and helper for years. Very devoted to the family. The ballroom smelled of expensive perfume, fresh-cut flowers, and raw ambition. 200 people who measured success in board seats and square footage were watching a man in a 15-year-old suit shake hands like he belonged. Because I did. Beaumont Aldridge extended his hand first. He ran Aldridge Capital, Cincinnati's third-largest private equity fund, and gave the same measured courtesy to janitors and CEOs alike. Pleasure to meet you, Gerald. Likewise, I said, holding his gaze. Cornelia Fentworth stood beside him, sharp-eyed and direct. She had developed half of Cincinnati's Covington waterfront and held builders in higher regard than bankers. What line of work are you in now, Gerald? I felt Darnell's attention sharpen at my shoulder, primed to cut in if I said the wrong thing. Well, I served as a master industrial steel mechanic for 31 years. I said, keeping my voice even. Precision work. Everything has to be exactly right, or the whole structure fails. Cornelia's expression shifted into something genuine. Steelwork, that's honest labor. Built this city, that trade. Yes, ma'am, I said. Beaumont gave a slow nod. My grandfather worked the mills. Hardest job he ever loved. Darnell's smile tightened at the corners. This wasn't the story he'd assembled. The frail old handyman was meant to shuffle and murmur, not stand with his shoulders square and speak plainly about skilled labor that earned real respect. Gerald is being modest. Darnell cut in, his tone easy and smooth. These days Had keeps himself busy with odd jobs here and there. Very active for his age. 5 jobs, I said. Maintenance, plumbing, security. I stay useful. Cornelia smiled. I like useful. The conversation moved on. After 3 minutes, Darnell steered me away, his grip on my elbow just a fraction too firm. The next hour unfolded in careful orchestration. I moved through the room with quiet restraint, accepting introductions, declining champagne. Watching Darnell grow more confident with every passing minute, I stayed silent about everything that mattered. He checked his watch repeatedly. 7:15, 7:37, 7:45. The formal announcement was set for 8 sur. His moment of triumph closing in on schedule. Darnell glowed with the particular certainty of a man who believes he's constructed a fortress when he's actually built a gallows. Every smile, every handshake, every minute ticking toward 800, drawing the rope tighter around a neck he doesn't know is his. I sipped water and kept one hand near the envelope inside my jacket. And waited. Across the ballroom, Solange stood near the exit doors in a navy gown that likely cost more than my truck. She wasn't mingling, wasn't smiling, wasn't positioned anywhere near her husband. All evening she'd kept a deliberate distance, 30 feet minimum, placing herself for departure rather than celebration. Her bearing announced what she couldn't say aloud in that room. I'm not standing beside him anymore. Anyone watching carefully enough could read the collapse of the marriage in where she chose to stand. She caught my eye once across the room. No words passed between us, just a small nod of acknowledgement. Then she looked away. At 7:40, Darnell sidled up to an investor near the bar. I was close enough to hear. We have a very special family announcement at 8:00, he said, his voice warm with anticipation. Something I've been working toward for years. Looking forward to it, the investor said. Darnell turned and scanned the room until he found me standing near a decorative column. Our eyes met. He smiled, genuine pleasure lighting his face. He believed I was broken. Thought I'd come to this glittering ballroom to watch my own humiliation unfold in silence. Thought 30 years of patience meant I'd lost the instinct to fight. He was so certain I was finished that he couldn't see I was simply waiting for the microphone. I stood 20 feet from the raised platform where the foundation's chairman would deliver opening remarks before handing the floor to featured speakers. Darnell had arranged to speak second. Prime position, maximum audience. I pressed my hand against the envelope one last time. Everything documented. Everything true. Everything Vivian never got to say about the son who'd taken from us while she was dying. At 7:50, Darnell moved toward the platform. He lifted a silver spoon and tapped it against a crystal champagne flute. The sharp ring cut through the room's conversation like a blade. 200 faces turned toward him. He smiled, radiant, victorious, and raised the microphone to his lips. I stood 20 feet away, manila envelope folded inside my jacket, watching my son prepare to announce the beginning of his own ending. Darnell was mid-sentence. I'm proud to announce our family's next chapter. When I rose from the corner table and began walking toward the stage, 200 faces turned. The string quartet's music wavered, then stopped. My footsteps on the marble floor became the only sound in the grand ballroom. Darnell froze at the microphone's smile locked in place like a frame from a photograph. Dad, what are you? This isn't the time. I kept walking, down the center aisle, steady pace. The manila envelope pressed against my ribs with each step. 2 security guards moved in from the sides, professional measured, ready to intercept the elderly man disturbing Cincinnati's most prestigious Thanksgiving gala. Then a hand rose from the back corner of the ballroom. One gesture. Palm out. Unmistakable authority. Reginald Vanthorpe sat in the last row, positioned where no one would notice, unless they were looking. He'd said he wouldn't attend. He'd said that and come anyway. The billionaire who had raised half of Cincinnati's skyline sat in a folding chair, watching his son-in-law's father walk toward a microphone. And when security moved to stop me, Reginald signaled, "Stand down." "Let him speak," he said quietly. The guard stepped back. I climbed the stage steps, stood beside my son, and held out my hand for the microphone. Darnell's fingers tightened around it. "Dad, please, not now. We can talk after." I waited. Our eyes met. Something in my face must have told him this moment was as inevitable as gravity, because his hand opened and the microphone passed between us like evidence changing hands in a courtroom. I adjusted the stand to my height and looked out at 200 Cincinnati elite in black tie attire, champagne, forgotten, every conversation suspended. "Good evening," I said. My voice moved through the speakers, calm and clear. "My name is Gerald Mallory. My son introduced me earlier as his former family handyman. That is incorrect. I am his father. And I have a few things I'd like to share tonight." I drew the manila envelope from my jacket and unfolded it. The papers crinkled against the amplified microphone. "I'm going to read 5 facts," I said. "No speculation, no emotion. Just facts that have been documented, notarized, and filed with the appropriate authorities." Darnell stood 3 feet to my left, the color draining from his face. "Point 1, I said. "My son Darnell Mallory embezzled $180,000 from his deceased mother's business, Vivian's Craft Supply. When confronted, he told me it was legitimate business debt. It was not. The funds were moved into personal accounts and spent on luxury expenditures." I turned the page. "Point 2. He forged my signature 23 times over 18 months, committing federal bank fraud. Total theft, $47,000 from joint accounts, established to cover my late wife Vivian's medical expenses. Forensic evidence has been submitted to the FBI Cincinnati field office." Somewhere in the audience, a champagne flute slipped from someone's fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the crack of it like a gunshot in the silence. No one moved to pick up the pieces. I kept reading. Point 3. He forged his wife Solange's signature on a fraudulent guardianship petition, claiming I was cognitively impaired and in need of legal supervision. The petition was heard by Judge Harriet Aldcroft in Hamilton County Probate Court on November 19th. It was dismissed with prejudice. I could hear breathing now, 200 people inhaling and exhaling in shared stillness. Point 4. All family assets, including property accounts and business interests. My late wife Vivian and I, built across 43 years of marriage, have been transferred to an irrevocable trust, protecting my 9-year-old granddaughter, Paisley Mallory. These assets cannot be accessed, controlled, or claimed by anyone except the designated trustee acting in Paisley's interest. My voice held level. Weather report. Grocery list. The absence of any anger made every word land with greater force. Point 5. The commercial warehouse property at Vivian's Craft Supply, valued at $4.8 million, was sold on October 27th to Keystone Logistics Corporation. Proceeds were immediately transferred to Paisley's shielded trust account. My son attempted to sell this property 3 weeks earlier using a forged power of attorney. That sale was blocked. I folded the papers. The sound of it echoed through the silence. The ballroom's crystal chandeliers burned steady overhead, casting light across 200 faces, wearing identical expressions, the look people carry when they understand they are witnessing something that will be repeated in Cincinnati whispers for decades. These are the facts," I said. "Everything I've stated is documented. Copies have been provided to the Ohio Attorney General's Office, the FBI, and my attorney Celestine Okafor of Okafor and Lennox Legal. I came tonight because my son planned to make an announcement about me. I thought you deserved to hear the truth first. I set the microphone flat on the podium. The hollow thunk resonated through the speakers. Darnell stood beside me, mouth opening and closing without sound, hands trembling at his sides. His face had gone the color of ash. The man who'd worked this room an hour ago with confident handshakes and sweeping gestures now looked like a person watching their own execution. That's not... He's confused. This is... His voice cracked, barely audible without the microphone. I came down the stage steps, without haste, without hurry, moving at the same measured pace I'd used going up. The center aisle opened before me. 200 motionless faces tracked my progress. I recognized Beaumont Aldridge in the third row, Cornelia Fentworth beside him. Judge Harriet Aldcroft sat near the back, expression unreadable. Not one person spoke. "Vivienne," I said quietly to myself. I told them everything. Near the exit, Solange stood with tears moving freely down her face, the navy gown dark against her pale skin. As I came level with her, she stepped aside. Her voice reached me just above a whisper. "I'm sorry." I gave a single nod and kept walking. The only sound was my own shoes against the marble. Behind me, the stage held Darnell in a kind of arrested stillness. The man who'd schemed to strip his father of independence, his granddaughter of her birthright, and his mother of her memory, now rooted speechless before the audience he'd spent months cultivating. I shoved through the heavy doors into the corridor. Before they swung shut, I caught one last look back. Darnell hadn't moved an inch from that microphone. 200 of Cincinnati's finest sat without a whisper, every eye fixed on the man who'd watched his carefully built world come undone in 8 minutes. The doors met with a muffled thud. Quiet folded around me like Vivian's hands. I'd taken maybe 3 steps when the doors opened again at my back, and Reginald Vanthorpe's voice cut through. "Mr. Mallory, wait." I stopped and turned. The billionaire was crossing the ballroom floor with the measured pace of a man who understood the weight of the moment, 200 witnesses reading every step. Each footfall rang off the marble like a gavel. Back on the stage, Darnell stood locked in place, watching his father-in-law walk toward the very man he'd tried to ruin. Reginald closed the distance, put out his hand. I gripped it. Firm, unhurried, a handshake that was also a verdict. "Mr. Mallory," he said, pitched loud enough to drift back through the open doorway. "I owe you a genuine apology. I should have looked harder at the man who married into my family before extending him any trust. That oversight is mine to own. Mr. Vanthorpe, that isn't necessary." His hand didn't let go. "Any man who converts honest sweat into 4.8 million of real assets over 43 years has earned better than what happened here." Then he lifted his voice just enough to fill the corners of that silent room without raising it to a shout. "The Vanthorpe Group would consider it a privilege to pursue industrial logistics discussions with your family trust in the year ahead." There I stood, 15-year-old suit hotel corridor, Cincinnati's most powerful man, holding my hand, while 200 phones went up at once. "Mr. Vanthorpe, I'm grateful," I said. "The honor would be mine." Those screens lit the dimness like a field of fireflies, every one of them locking onto the same picture, a billionaire clasping hands with the man his son-in-law had passed off as a retired handyman. Camera clicks pattered like light rain on a tin roof. Before dawn, that image would be burning through every inbox in Cincinnati's business community. Reginald gave a single nod, let go, and walked back inside. His gaze never found the stage, never acknowledged that his son-in-law existed. The silence of that non-look said everything. I turned toward the exit. Mr. Mallory. Solange stood 10 feet off in her navy gown, Paisley's hand wrapped tight in hers. My granddaughter's eyes were swollen from crying. Solange's mascara had run and been tidied, but the traces were still there. Mr. Mallory, she said, voice splintering. I had absolutely no idea the madness went this deep. I am so deeply sorry. I studied her 18 years of marriage built on a husband's fabrications, a father-in-law she'd been told was greedy and self-serving documents she'd signed without question, and a name forged onto papers she'd never touched. Solange, I said quietly, there's nothing for you to apologize for. Your only job now is keeping this little girl safe. Paisley tore free of her mother and came at me in a run. Both arms locked around my middle, her face buried against my jacket, and I felt her shoulders going in small shudders. Everything's all right now, sweetheart, I murmured, holding her close. I promise. It's over. She drew back a little to look up at me, Vivian's exact eyes in a 9-year-old face. Then she rose on her toes and whispered right against my ear, too low for anyone else to catch. And Daddy called you an old bastard. I heard him last month when you left after dinner. I didn't like it when he said that. Something tightened hard behind my ribs. 9 years old, and she'd been storing that, watching her father's ugliness, quietly picking her side in a conflict no child should have been made to understand. I know, baby, I told her. I know. Solange rested a hand briefly on my arm. We go tonight. My father's property. Paisley will be looked after there. I nodded. Good. That's good. I pressed my lips to Paisley's forehead, then eased her back toward her mother. Solange took her daughter's hand and moved to the elevators without so much as a glance toward the ballroom. Not one look back at the man she was leaving behind. I held still in that corridor for half a minute, letting the strength return to my legs. Beyond the open ballroom doors, I noticed something shifting. 3 men in dark suits, Vanthorpe Group legal, recognizable by the practiced lockstep of people paid to make problems disappear, had formed a loose triangle around the stage where Darnell stood. They were walking him toward a side exit conversation, too quiet to carry, but the intent obvious in every posture. Not a conversation, an ejection. I took the long way out past the front desk, the darkened coat check, the lobby bar with its glasses already going unwashed. At my back, the gala was quietly falling apart. Guests drifted toward doors in 2s and 3s, voices dropped to urgent murmurs. The string quartet had given up on music and were latching their cases. Servers lifted flutes from tables nobody was standing at anymore. I went through the revolving door into November, and the cold hit me square. Cincinnati's skyline stood lit and indifferent against a black sky. I'd left the truck 6 blocks out to spare myself the valet charge. I walked, my phone buzzed. Celestine saw the video. 6 different people sent it to me already. You okay? I thumbed back. Going home. Then Aldous, that took real guts. Vivian would be proud. I didn't answer that one. Put the phone away and walked. 6 blocks later, I pulled the door open and climbed into the cold cab. Sat there 5 minutes with the key in my hand before I turned the engine over. Vivian's photograph rode in the sun visor the way it always had. I flipped it down and looked at her face. Well, I said to nobody, I told them. I told them everything. She didn't answer. But something in my chest shifted the way a knot does when the tension finally goes out of it. Something that had been locked up tight for 11 years, starting at last to give. I drove through streets that were mostly empty. Back at the Hilton Cincinnati Netherland Plaza, Darnell Mallory was learning from someone in a dark suit that the Vanthorpe Group no longer required his services effective that same hour. His wife was already searching attorney contacts on her phone. His daughter was in a car headed to her grandfather's estate with clear instructions about access. Federal fraud indictments were going to land on Monday morning, though I had no knowledge of that yet. That part came later. What I had was simpler. I'd stepped into a room where people judged a man's value by his portfolio, and I'd read the truth aloud to 200 of them. A billionaire had gripped my hand in front of every camera in the place. My granddaughter had run to me, and my son's entire construction had caved in under 8 minutes of plain, documented fact, delivered without once raising my voice past a normal speaking tone. I pulled into my usual place behind the Hyde Park building and climbed the stairs. The kitchen light had been burning since morning. Vivienne's photograph was where I'd left it on the counter. The evidence folder, stripped of its contents, now lay open beside the sink. I ran a glass of water, drank it standing up, and set it in the rack. My phone lit up again. I let it. First snow was still coming down outside over Cincinnati. I pulled out the chair at the kitchen table, the one Vivienne and I had sat at together for 43 years, and I let myself experience what I'd kept sealed off in that ballroom. All of it at once. Exhaustion, relief, grief, the quiet that follows justice. 4:15 a.m. came and went the next morning without a sound, and I lay there until light appeared at my kitchen window at 7:00, genuinely confused for a moment, before I recalled switching the alarm off. All 5 of them. The delivery route, the overnight cleaning, the plumbing calls, the warehouse security walk, none of it required me today. Getting up was easier somehow, the joints less vocal than usual. I made coffee the slow way, the way Vivienne had drilled into me, 2 tablespoons a cup, plus 1 for the pot. Snow was still on the street outside, and the kitchen warmed up the way it does when something is being brewed and there's nowhere else to be. My phone had been off since the gala. When I powered it on, the screen took a moment to process what was waiting for it. 47 messages, 23 missed calls. Every one of them Darnell. I tapped the first, 11:42 p.m. Thanksgiving night. "Dad, please, I am so sorry. Can we talk? I need to explain." I put the phone down face first and left it there. 3 years at 4:15 a.m. 3 years of 5 jobs running simultaneously. 3 years of muscles that never fully recovered, of pennies that always had somewhere to go, of hours benchmarked against Vivienne's hospital bills and the long inventory of Darnell's deceptions. And now nothing on the calendar. Just coffee and snow. I sat there with the mug and watched the flakes come down and felt something return to me that had been absent since the day Vivienne passed. Peace with no obligation attached. Some apologies are tendered after the window for them has already closed. December's snow turned to January rain. That rain glazed over into February ice. 3 months moving like pages, turning each one sitting a little less heavily than the one before. I could feel the posture in my shoulders changing as the load of 5 simultaneous jobs came off me, one notice at a time. Monday to December 1st, I went in person to give 4 employers the news. The delivery company first. Deshaun was waiting in the loading bay, face composed and serious. The moment I told him I was done, he reached out. "You earned this retirement, sir," he said. "Earned it the hard way." Next was the office tower where I'd run a mop through empty corridors every night. Nadette ran that cleaning crew and gave the same respect to every person on her payroll, regardless of the hours they worked. 32 years in the business had taught her to tell the difference between people who looked past you and people who actually registered your presence. When I said I was moving on, she pulled me in close and held on. "You were the best partner I ever had," she told me. "Don't become a stranger." The weekend plumbing clients shook my hand, wished me well, and asked if I could point them towards someone reliable. I gave them 3 names, solid workers who needed the business. Over at the Pendleton warehouse, Broderick had coffee waiting at the loading dock. "The doors stay unlocked anytime you want to drop by," he said. "Though I figure you're past needing us now." I held on to exactly one job, the overnight security shift with Aldous. Not for the money, not out of need, because I chose it. That's what I discovered. Freedom isn't the absence of work. It's working on your own terms instead of desperations. March brought early warmth. April came with blossoms along the river. Celestine called me to her office and laid documents across the desk, the way you spread cards when the hand is already won. "Final accounting," she said. Darnell had pleaded guilty to federal bank fraud, 5 years probation, 200 hours community service, full restitution of $47,000. State elder exploitation charges $180,000, repaid plus interest over 7 years. The forgery conviction drew a 3-year suspended sentence. The guardianship petition was permanently expunged from every record. She slid a summary chart across the desk. Clean columns of numbers. Legal language reduced to plain arithmetic. "Darnell legally owes you $250,600, Celestine said. "You never owed him a single dime." I looked at those restitution figures and thought of Vivian. She never cared about the money. She wanted the truth known in this family. Now 200 witnesses and a federal court record would carry it forward indefinitely. "The money doesn't matter, Celestine," I said. "Paisley's safe. That's all that matters." "For the record," Celestine said quietly, "you won completely. Every single count." I folded the chart and slipped it into my jacket pocket right next to Vivian's photograph. Walked out into April sunshine carrying something I had no exact word for. Not triumph, not revenge. Just the end of a long thing. April night. 2:00 a.m., downtown security shift. I sat at the monitoring desk beside Aldous, watching empty hallways scroll across silent screens. 3 years we'd shared this shift, but the nature of it had changed entirely. The grinding exhaustion had lifted. My shoulders felt like my own again. We were here by choice now, not because missing a night meant the rent didn't get paid. 2 old men keeping watch over quiet buildings because we wanted to, not because survival demanded it. Then my phone lit up on the desk. Picture message from Paisley. She'd painted a warehouse in bright blue tempera, childlike brushstrokes, bold and joyful. The caption read, "Grandpa, I'm painting your warehouse. I'm painting it bright blue because I know it's your favorite color." I smiled. Aldous glanced over, took in the painting, and smiled too. "That kid is going to have a beautiful life," he said. "Yeah," I said. "She is." We settled back into easy, quiet monitors, showing nothing but empty corridors and locked doors. Outside, Cincinnati slept. Inside, 2 men who no longer had to be anywhere kept their watch anyway, doing work that mattered not because the buildings needed guarding, but because they'd chosen to be there. I thought about Vivian. 43 years of marriage built on honesty and plain hard work. About Darnell, who'd tried to take what we'd built and wound up with nothing but a court-ordered debt, and a daughter who'd picked her grandfather. About Paisley painting warehouses blue at her mother's kitchen table, shielded by trusts, and one old man's refusal to give up. Sometimes a whole lifetime of working in the dark teaches you just one thing. What matters most, it is never visible to anyone watching from the outside. It lives in what you hold on to after everything else has been stripped away. I set the phone down with Paisley's painting glowing on the screen. Aldous poured from the shared thermos. The monitors cycled through their quiet hallways and locked lobbies. 200 a.m. in Cincinnati. April 2024. An old man at a desk he didn't need watching over buildings that didn't require it guarding things that were already beyond anyone's reach. Vivian would have understood. I sipped my coffee and kept the watch. If you've stayed with me to the end of this, thank you. Truly. This story cost something to carry, and I hope it gave something back. Looking back now, I can see how close I came to losing everything. Not because I was weak, but because I trusted when I should have watched. And I stayed quiet when I should have acted sooner. What saved me wasn't money or connections. It was the truth Vivian had the wisdom to protect, long before I knew I'd need it. I believe God places the right people in our path at exactly the right hour. Aldous Celestine Paisley, even Reginald Vanthorpe stepping forward in that ballroom. None of that was coincidence. Here is what I want to leave with you. Document everything. When money moves inside a family, kindness without records becomes someone else's evidence against you. Never sign what you haven't read. A signature is your word made permanent. Protect it like one. If a child trusts you with a secret, honor that trust completely. Paisley's courage changed the outcome of this entire fight. And this, the truth, does not need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be witnessed. These father stories rarely get told in public. The men who live them tend to keep their heads down and keep working. But family justice matters, and sometimes the only way it arrives is when one person refuses to be silent one moment longer. If this story reached you today, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below. Tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't already, I'd be grateful if you subscribed to alphadadstories so we can keep telling the ones that deserve to be told. Thank you for being here. Take good care of yourself and the people who are counting on you. Until next time.